Every morning, as sunlight first touches the Earth's surface, an ancient dance begins. Energy flows like invisible rivers through interconnected pathways, linking the smallest microbe to the mightiest predator in an endless web of sustenance and survival. These are the food chains and food webs that bind all life together in a tapestry so intricate that removing a single thread can alter the entire pattern. Tonight, we'll follow these pathways of energy as they weave through ecosystems, connecting every living thing in relationships, both delicate and profound, revealing how the fate of each organism is quietly, inevitably intertwined with all others. In the quiet moments before dawn, when the world exists in that gentle space between night and day, something extraordinary begins to unfold across every corner of our planet. As the first rays of sunlight pierce through the darkness, touching dewdrops on grass blades and filtering through forest canopies, an ancient alchemy commences. This is the moment when energy from a star 93 million miles away begins its transformation into the very substance of life itself. The foundation of every food chain, every web of life, every ecosystem that has ever existed rests upon the remarkable ability of certain organisms to capture and convert energy from their environment. These are the primary producers, the architects of sustenance, the quiet builders of all biological abundance. Without them, the intricate networks of feeding relationships that connect all living things would simply cease to exist. Primary production takes two fundamental forms, each representing a different pathway for capturing energy from the environment. The first and most familiar is photosynthesis, that elegant process by which plants, algae, and certain bacteria harness the power of sunlight. The second, less well known but equally vital, is chemosynthesis, where specialized bacteria extract energy from chemical compounds, often in the most unlikely places where sunlight never reaches. To understand photosynthesis, we might imagine standing in a sunlit meadow on a warm summer afternoon. The grasses around us appear deceptively still, yet within each blade, within every leaf of every plant stretching toward the sky, a complex molecular dance is taking place. Chlorophyll, that green pigment that gives plants their color, acts as nature's solar panel, absorbing photons of light energy. This captured energy drives a series of chemical reactions that transform carbon dioxide from the air and water from the soil into glucose, a simple sugar that serves as the basic fuel for life. This process is so fundamental, so essential to life as we know it, that it's worth pausing to appreciate its elegance. Every molecule of oxygen we breathe is a byproduct of photosynthesis. Every calorie of energy that powers our bodies, regardless of whether we eat plants directly or consume animals that eat plants, ultimately traces back to this conversion of sunlight into chemical bonds. But photosynthesis extends far beyond the terrestrial plants we see around us. In freshwater lakes and ponds, microscopic algae drift through the water column, their tiny chloroplasts working constantly to capture available light. These phytoplankton may be invisible to the casual observer, but they form the foundation of aquatic food webs, supporting everything from the smallest zooplankton to the largest fish. In the ocean, vast blooms of phytoplankton can be seen from space, turning the water green with their chlorophyll as they photosynthesize en masse. Even more remarkable are the photosynthetic bacteria called cyanobacteria, ancient organisms that were among the first to develop the ability to use sunlight for energy. These bacterial pioneers not only continue to play vital roles in modern ecosystems, but were responsible for one of the most dramatic transformations in Earth's history. Billions of years ago, their photosynthetic activity pumped so much oxygen into the atmosphere that it fundamentally altered the planet's chemistry, paving the way for complex life forms that could use oxygen for respiration. In forest ecosystems, photosynthesis takes on layers of complexity. The towering trees that form the canopy capture the majority of available sunlight, their broad leaves positioned to maximize light absorption. Beneath them, smaller trees and shrubs have adapted to thrive in reduced light conditions, their leaves often larger and thinner to capture what filtered sunlight reaches them. On the forest floor, mosses and ferns represent some of the most efficient low light photosynthesizers, eking out an existence in conditions where only a fraction of the original sunlight penetrates. But what about places where sunlight never reaches? In the deepest parts of the ocean, where crushing pressure and eternal darkness prevail, life might seem impossible. Yet, even here, in these alien environments, primary production occurs through the remarkable process of chemosynthesis. At hydrothermal vents scattered across the ocean floor, where superheated water rich in chemicals erupts from the Earth's crust, specialized bacteria have evolved to extract energy not from sunlight, but from the chemical bonds in compounds like hydrogen sulfide. These chemosynthetic bacteria represent one of life's most extraordinary adaptations. Instead of using light energy to drive chemical reactions, they harness the energy released when certain chemicals are oxidized. In many ways, chemosynthesis is the mirror image of photosynthesis, using chemical energy instead of light energy, but serving the same fundamental purpose: converting inorganic compounds into organic molecules that can serve as food. The bacteria at hydrothermal vents don't just survive in these extreme conditions, they thrive, forming the base of entirely unique ecosystems. Giant tube worms, some reaching lengths of over 6 feet, house these chemosynthetic bacteria in their tissues, forming a symbiotic relationship where the bacteria provide nutrition while the worms provide protection and access to chemicals. Ghostly white crabs scuttle across the vent fields, feeding on bacterial mats, while unusual fish and other creatures complete these sunlight independent food webs. Chemosynthesis isn't limited to hydrothermal vents. In cold seeps, where hydrocarbon compounds leak slowly from the seafloor, methane eating bacteria form the foundation of similar ecosystems. In caves, where no light has penetrated for millions of years, chemosynthetic bacteria feed on sulfur compounds, supporting unique communities of cave adapted organisms. The total amount of energy captured by primary producers on Earth is staggering. Through photosynthesis alone, plants and other photosynthetic organisms capture approximately 1% of the solar energy that reaches Earth's surface. While this might seem like a small percentage, it represents an enormous amount of energy, roughly 6 times more than humanity's total energy consumption. Different ecosystems vary dramatically in their primary productivity. Tropical rainforests, with their year-round warmth, abundant rainfall, and intense sunlight, are among the most productive terrestrial ecosystems on Earth. At the other extreme, desert ecosystems, limited by water availability, and tundra ecosystems, constrained by temperature, show much lower rates of primary production. In aquatic systems, productivity patterns follow different rules. Open ocean waters, despite covering vast areas, are often relatively unproductive because they lack essential nutrients. However, in areas where deep, nutrient rich waters upwell to the surface, or where rivers carry nutrients from land, Phytoplankton can bloom in spectacular fashion, creating some of the most productive ecosystems on Earth. The seasonality of primary production creates rhythms that ripple through entire ecosystems. In temperate regions, the burst of plant growth that occurs each spring provides a pulse of energy that supports breeding seasons for many animals. Migratory species time their movements to coincide with peak productivity in different regions. Understanding primary production helps us appreciate why the loss of photosynthetic organisms can be so devastating. Deforestation doesn't just remove trees, it eliminates the foundation of entire ecosystems. When coral reefs bleach and lose their symbiotic algae, the entire reef ecosystem begins to collapse because its primary producers have vanished. As we contemplate these primary producers, from the mighty sequoias that can live for thousands of years to the microscopic bacteria at deep sea vents, we begin to see them not just as individual organisms, but as the foundation stones of life's grand architecture. Every blade of grass, every floating algae cell, every chemosynthetic bacterium represents a crucial link in the chain that connects the raw energy of the universe to the complex, beautiful tapestry of life on Earth. This captured energy, now locked away in the chemical bonds of organic molecules, doesn't remain trapped for long. Soon, other organisms will begin to claim their share, setting in motion the great transfer of energy that flows through every ecosystem. The energy captured by primary producers doesn't remain locked within leaves and stems for long. Across the world's ecosystems, a vast assembly of organisms has evolved to claim their share of this stored sunlight, beginning the first great transfer of energy up through the food chain. These are the herbivores, the plant eaters, the primary consumers who face one of nature's most challenging tasks, extracting usable nutrition from the tough, fibrous, and often chemically defended tissues of plants. Standing in an African savanna at dawn, watching a herd of zebras methodically cropping grass in the golden light, one might assume that eating plants is a simple matter. The reality is far more complex. Plant material presents numerous challenges to would-be consumers. Cell walls made of cellulose create tough barriers that resist digestion. Many plants produce toxic compounds as chemical defenses. Others are simply low in the proteins and nutrients that animals need to survive and grow. The relationship between plants and their consumers is ancient, stretching back hundreds of millions of years. Over this vast span of time, herbivores have evolved remarkable adaptations to overcome plant defenses, while plants have continually developed new ways to protect themselves. This ongoing evolutionary arms race has shaped both the structure of plant communities and the extraordinary diversity of herbivorous animals we see today. Consider the challenge facing a caterpillar as it chews through a leaf. The cellulose that gives the leaf its structure cannot be digested by the caterpillar's own enzymes. Instead, the insect must rely on symbiotic bacteria in its gut that possess the specialized enzymes needed to break down cellulose into digestible sugars. This partnership between animal and microbe represents one of the most fundamental relationships in the living world, repeated in countless variations across the spectrum of herbivorous life. The most sophisticated solution to the cellulose problem has evolved in ruminants, those four-chambered marvels of mammalian engineering. In a cow's rumen, the largest of its four stomach chambers, billions of bacteria, protozoa, and fungi work together in a carefully orchestrated microbial symphony. These microorganisms can accomplish what the cow cannot. They break down cellulose, lignin, and other complex plant compounds, converting them into volatile fatty acids that the cow can absorb and use for energy. This process requires time and patience. A cow will spend 6 to 8 hours each day simply chewing, either when initially consuming grass or during rumination, when partially digested food is regurgitated and chewed again. The repetitive meditative quality of a cow's chewing reflects the mechanical processing needed to break down tough plant fibers and expose more surface area to microbial attack. The rumen operates as a vast fermentation chamber, maintained at a steady temperature of around 39 degrees Celsius. The environment is anaerobic, creating conditions that favor the growth of specialized microorganisms. Different species of bacteria specialize in breaking down different components of plant matter. Some attack cellulose, others focus on proteins or starches, and still others produce vitamins that the host animal requires but cannot synthesize on its own. This microbial partnership comes with costs as well as benefits. The fermentation process produces methane as a byproduct, which the ruminant must release through belching. A single cow produces approximately 200 liters of methane per day, making livestock a significant contributor to global methane emissions. Additionally, the energy-intensive nature of maintaining this microbial ecosystem means that ruminants convert only about 10 to 15% of the plant energy they consume into their own body mass. Not all herbivores take the ruminant approach. Horses and other hindgut fermenters have evolved a different strategy, housing their microbial partners in an enlarged cecum and colon rather than in a complex stomach system. This arrangement allows for faster food processing, enabling horses to consume lower quality forage and still maintain the energy levels needed for rapid movement. The trade-off is less efficient nutrient extraction, requiring horses to eat almost continuously during their waking hours. The world of insect herbivores reveals even more specialized solutions. Termites, those small architects of the insect world, have developed one of the most remarkable partnerships with microorganisms. Deep in the termite's gut live protozoa that contain symbiotic bacteria capable of digesting cellulose. This three-way partnership allows termites to survive entirely on dead wood, converting the cellulose into nutrients that support not just individual termites, but entire colonies numbering in the millions. Leafcutter ants have taken herbivory in yet another direction. Rather than eating leaves directly, these industrious insects harvest fresh vegetation and carry it back to their underground colonies, where they use it to cultivate fungus gardens. The fungi break down the tough plant material, and the ants harvest the nutrient-rich fungal growth. This agricultural approach allows leafcutter colonies to support populations that can exceed those of major human cities. The seasonal patterns of plant growth create corresponding rhythms in herbivore populations and behavior. In temperate regions, the burst of spring growth provides a brief period of abundant, high-quality forage. Many herbivores time their reproductive cycles to coincide with this seasonal bounty, ensuring that energy-demanding activities like lactation and rapid juvenile growth occur when food is most plentiful. Arctic caribou demonstrate this principle on a grand scale. These animals migrate hundreds of miles each year, following the wave of plant productivity as it moves across the tundra with the advancing season. The timing of these migrations has been fine-tuned over thousands of years, with herds arriving at calving grounds just as the first nutritious spring vegetation emerges from beneath the snow. The challenges of plant eating have led to remarkable dietary specializations. Koalas survive almost entirely on eucalyptus leaves, despite the fact that these leaves are toxic to most other animals. The koala's digestive system has evolved to neutralize these toxins, and its gut microbiome has adapted to extract nutrition from this challenging food source. However, this specialization comes at a cost. Eucalyptus leaves are so low in nutrition that koalas must sleep 18 to 22 hours per day to conserve energy. Giant pandas represent another extreme of dietary specialization. Despite having the digestive system of a carnivore, pandas subsist almost entirely on bamboo, a food source so nutritionally poor that they must consume up to 40 pounds per day to meet their basic energy requirements. Their digestive efficiency is remarkably low, extracting only about 17% of the energy available in the bamboo they consume. The relationship between herbivores and their plant food sources extends beyond simple consumption. Many herbivores serve as important dispersal agents for the very plants they eat. Seeds that pass through an animal's digestive system are often deposited in new locations, along with a package of natural fertilizer. Some plants have evolved fruits specifically to attract animal dispersers, trading a portion of their energy investment for the service of seed transport. Aquatic herbivores face their own unique set of challenges. Marine animals that graze on algae must contend with the salt content of their environment while extracting nutrition from often microscopic plant material. Manatees, the gentle giants of coastal waters, can consume up to 100 pounds of seagrass per day, spending most of their waking hours foraging in shallow waters where their preferred food plants grow. The efficiency of energy transfer from plants to herbivores varies dramatically depending on the type of plant material and the herbivore species involved. Fresh, young plant growth with high protein content and low fiber might transfer 20 to 30% of its energy to herbivore biomass. Mature, fibrous plant material might transfer only 5 to 10%. This relatively low efficiency of energy transfer is a fundamental constraint that shapes the structure of ecosystems, limiting the biomass of herbivores that can be supported by any given amount of plant production. The impact of herbivores on plant communities extends far beyond simple consumption. Grazing animals can dramatically alter the species composition of plant communities, favoring plants that are tolerant of frequent defoliation over those that invest heavily in above ground structure. In grassland ecosystems, the coevolution of grasses and grazing animals has created plant communities that actually depend on periodic consumption to maintain their vigor and diversity. The presence or absence of herbivores can trigger cascading effects throughout entire ecosystems. When large herbivores are removed from a system, plant communities often change dramatically, growing taller and denser, which in turn affects the animals that depend on more open habitats. The reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone National Park famously demonstrated how predators can indirectly shape plant communities by influencing herbivore behavior and populations. Some herbivores have evolved to become living processors of plant material, converting low quality vegetation into high quality protein that can support the next level of the food web. A grasshopper might seem insignificant as it nibbles on a blade of grass, but it represents a crucial link in the chain of energy transfer, concentrating the diffuse energy stored in plant tissues into a more nutritionally dense package that can support spiders, birds, and other predators. The world of herbivory reveals nature's endless creativity in solving the fundamental challenge of extracting energy from plant matter. From the complex microbial partnerships of ruminants to the agricultural practices of leafcutter ants, from the toxic tolerance of koalas to the massive appetites of manatees, herbivores have found myriad ways to claim their portion of the sun's energy stored in plant tissues. As these primary consumers convert plant material into animal biomass, they set the stage for the next great transfer of energy through the ecosystem. The nutrients and energy, now concentrated in herbivore tissues, will soon attract the attention of predators, initiating another level of the intricate web of feeding relationships that connects all life on Earth. In the stillness of a shallow pond at dusk, a great blue heron stands motionless, its reflection perfectly mirrored in the dark water. For minutes, perhaps hours, it maintains this statue like pose, waiting with infinite patience for the perfect moment. When a fish finally ventures within striking distance, the heron's neck snaps forward with lightning speed, and in an instant, the energy that once flowed through algae and into small aquatic herbivores begins its next journey up the food chain. This scene captures one of nature's most fundamental relationships, the endless dance between predator and prey, hunter and hunted. At this second trophic level, energy transfer becomes more complex, more dramatic, and significantly less efficient than the steady consumption of plant matter by herbivores. Secondary consumers must actively pursue their food, and their prey has every evolutionary incentive to avoid becoming a meal. The world of predation encompasses an extraordinary diversity of hunting strategies, each fine tuned by millions of years of evolution. Some predators, like our patient heron, rely on stealth and surprise. Others depend on speed and agility. Still others use cooperative hunting techniques that rival the complexity of human military tactics. Each approach represents a different solution to the fundamental challenge of capturing mobile, often intelligent prey. Consider the hunting strategy of a red fox stalking mice beneath winter snow. The fox can hear the tiny sounds of rodent movement through several inches of snow, using its acute hearing to locate prey it cannot see. When hunting, a fox will often leap high into the air and dive nose first into the snow, a behavior called mousing. This technique requires precise timing and spatial awareness, as the fox must calculate the exact location of its prey based solely on sound, accounting for the refraction of sound waves through the snow layer. At the opposite end of the spectrum, we find the pack hunters, whose coordinated strategies can bring down prey many times larger than any individual predator. Wolves demonstrate some of the most sophisticated cooperative hunting behaviors in the animal kingdom. A wolf pack hunting elk might split into multiple groups, with some wolves driving the prey toward others positioned in ambush. The pack communicates through subtle body language and vocalizations, coordinating their movements across vast distances. The energy economics of predation reveal why secondary consumers are always less numerous than the herbivores they consume. When a wolf catches and consumes a deer, only about 10% of the energy stored in the deer's tissues will be incorporated into the wolf's body. The remainder is lost to heat during the various metabolic processes used for the energy-intensive activities of hunting, or simply not absorbed during digestion. This inefficiency, repeated at each trophic level, explains why ecosystems can support far fewer predators than prey. Marine environments showcase some of the most specialized predatory adaptations. The archerfish has evolved the remarkable ability to knock insects off overhanging branches by shooting precisely aimed jets of water. This behavior requires the fish to account for light refraction at the water's surface, effectively solving complex physics problems to secure its meals. Young archerfish must learn this skill through practice, improving their accuracy over time, much like human children learning to throw a ball. In the open ocean, predatory relationships take on different dimensions. The bluefin tuna represents one of the ocean's most efficient predators, capable of reaching speeds exceeding 40 miles per hour. Its body is a marvel of hydrodynamic engineering, with a streamlined form that minimizes drag and powerful muscles that generate explosive bursts of speed. The tuna's warm bloodedness, unusual among fish, allows it to maintain high activity levels in cool waters where its cold blooded prey becomes sluggish. Some of the most fascinating predatory strategies involve deception and manipulation. The anglerfish, lurking in the deep ocean depths, uses a bioluminescent lure to attract prey within striking distance. This living fishing rod extends from the fish's head, glowing with bacterial light that draws curious smaller fish close enough to be engulfed by the anglerfish's enormous mouth. The energy investment in maintaining these light producing bacteria pays off when unsuspecting prey mistakes the lure for food. Predatory insects demonstrate that effective hunting doesn't require large size. The praying mantis, with its lightning fast forelegs and compound eyes that can track moving objects with precision, can capture prey as large as small birds. The mantis remains perfectly still, often swaying slightly to mimic vegetation moving in the breeze until prey ventures within the strike zone of its raptorial forelegs. Spider predation represents yet another evolutionary solution, with these eight-legged hunters constructing elaborate traps rather than actively pursuing prey. An orb weaver spider invests significant energy in silk production, spinning webs that can capture flying insects with remarkable efficiency. The spider monitors its web through vibrations transmitted through the silk strands, able to distinguish between the struggles of trapped prey and harmless disturbances like wind or debris. The relationship between predator and prey extends far beyond simple consumption. Predators exert powerful selective pressure on their prey, favoring traits that enhance survival. This constant evolutionary pressure has produced remarkable defensive adaptations. The schooling behavior of fish that confuses predators with synchronized movements, the warning coloration of toxic species, and the cryptic camouflage that makes detection nearly impossible. Many prey species have evolved sophisticated early warning systems. Prairie dogs maintain complex communication networks with different alarm calls for different types of predators. These calls can specify not just the type of threat, but also its size, speed, and direction of approach. The energy cost of maintaining this vigilance system is significant, but it's far less than the cost of being eaten. Some secondary consumers have evolved to specialize on particular types of prey, developing hunting techniques so specific that they can exploit prey that other predators cannot. The secretary bird of African grasslands specializes in hunting venomous snakes, using its long legs to stamp on its prey while staying safely out of striking range. Its thick leg scales provide protection against snake fangs, and its hunting technique neutralizes the snake's primary defense mechanism. In aquatic systems, predatory relationships often involve remarkable adaptations for life in three-dimensional space. Dolphins use echolocation not just for navigation, but as a hunting tool, using focused sound beams to stun fish or locate prey buried in sandy bottoms. The precision of dolphin echolocation surpasses human-made sonar systems, allowing these marine predators to detect objects the size of a ping pong ball from distances exceeding 100 meters. The timing of predatory activity often reflects the behavior patterns of prey species. Many predators are crepuscular, most active during dawn and dusk when their prey may be more vulnerable or visible. Owls have evolved exceptional night vision and silent flight, allowing them to hunt rodents that emerge under cover of darkness. The asymmetrical positioning of owl ear openings allows for precise sound localization, enabling them to hunt successfully in complete darkness. Seasonal changes create shifting dynamics in predator prey relationships. During winter months in northern regions, the concentration of prey around limited food sources can create opportunities for predators, but it also means predators must compete more intensely with each other. Some predators respond by switching prey species seasonally, demonstrating the behavioral flexibility that allows them to exploit changing opportunities. The energy demands of predation require most secondary consumers to be opportunistic, taking advantage of whatever prey becomes available rather than specializing too narrowly. A red-tailed hawk might hunt small mammals in open fields during summer, but switch to feeding on bird concentrations at feeders during winter. This flexibility in hunting behavior allows predators to survive in environments where prey availability fluctuates unpredictably. As we observe these intricate predator prey relationships, we begin to see how energy becomes increasingly concentrated as it moves up through trophic levels. The scattered energy of many small herbivores becomes consolidated into fewer but more energy dense predator bodies. This concentration process continues as we move higher in the food web, where even more specialized predators wait to claim their share of the sun's energy, now several times removed from its original capture by photosynthetic organisms. These apex predators and tertiary consumers represent the final links in most food chains, the ultimate beneficiaries of energy that began its journey in the simple splitting of water molecules under morning sunlight. Their stories of hunting and survival reveal the final chapters in the great transfer of energy through the living world. In the vast expanse of the open ocean, a great white shark glides through the deep blue water with effortless grace. Its massive form, perfectly sculpted by millions of years of evolution, represents the culmination of energy transfer through marine food webs. This apex predator embodies concentrated power, its body built from energy that once flowed through countless microscopic phytoplankton, then through small fish, and finally through larger predatory fish. Here, at the summit of consumption, we encounter the ultimate beneficiaries of the sun's energy as it reaches the end of its journey through the living world. Apex predators and tertiary consumers occupy a unique position in ecosystems, wielding influence far beyond what their relatively small numbers might suggest. These top level carnivores shape entire ecological communities through their presence, their hunting patterns, and even their absence. Their role extends beyond simple predation. They are ecosystem architects, sculpting the behavior and distribution of species throughout the food web beneath them. The great white shark exemplifies the physical perfection that evolution can achieve at the apex of marine food chains. Its torpedo-shaped body minimizes drag, while its powerful tail generates tremendous thrust. Rows of razor-sharp teeth are constantly replaced throughout the shark's lifetime, ensuring it always has the tools needed to capture and process prey. Its sensory systems are equally impressive, with the ability to detect minute electrical fields generated by the muscle contractions of potential prey, allowing it to hunt effectively even in murky water or complete darkness. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of apex predators is their efficiency as energy concentrators. A single great white shark represents the accumulated energy of thousands of smaller organisms. The phytoplankton consumed by small fish, which were then eaten by larger fish, which in turn became prey for the shark, have all contributed their energy to create this magnificent predator. This concentration process explains why apex predators are relatively rare in any ecosystem, their populations constrained by the fundamental laws of energy transfer. On land, large cats demonstrate different approaches to apex predation. The solitary tiger, stalking through dense jungle undergrowth, represents stealth and power combined with remarkable patience. A tiger might spend hours positioning itself for the perfect ambush, waiting for prey to venture within range of its explosive charge. The energy investment in such patient hunting is enormous, but the payoff from successfully capturing large prey can sustain the tiger for days. In contrast, lions have evolved a more social approach to apex predation. A pride of lions can tackle prey much larger than any individual could handle alone. African buffalo, massive and dangerous with their curved horns and unpredictable temperament, become manageable when faced with coordinated lion attacks. The lioness's hunting strategies involve complex cooperation, with different individuals taking on specialized roles during the hunt. Some lions serve as drivers, pushing prey toward other pride members positioned for ambush attacks. The influence of apex predators extends far beyond their direct consumption of prey. The mere presence of a top predator can alter the behavior of animals several levels down in the food web, a phenomenon known as the landscape of fear. Deer in wolf territory spend more time vigilant and less time feeding in open areas, which allows vegetation to recover in those exposed locations. This behavioral shift can ultimately change entire plant communities, demonstrating how apex predators shape ecosystems through fear as much as through actual predation. Birds of prey represent aerial apex predators, dominating the three-dimensional hunting ground of the sky. The peregrine falcon, diving at speeds exceeding 200 miles per hour, demonstrates the ultimate expression of aerial hunting prowess. These remarkable birds hunt other birds in mid-flight, requiring split-second timing and extraordinary aerial maneuvering abilities. The peregrine's hunting success depends not just on speed, but on precise calculations of trajectory and timing that would challenge advanced computer systems. Golden eagles take a different approach to aerial predation, using their exceptional eyesight to spot prey from incredible distances. An eagle can detect a rabbit moving through grass from over 2 miles away, its vision roughly 8 times sharper than human eyesight. Once prey is spotted, the eagle's hunting strategy combines patience with explosive action, soaring on thermal currents to conserve energy while maintaining surveillance over vast territories. Marine environments harbor some of the most specialized apex predators on Earth. Orcas, or killer whales, demonstrate perhaps the most sophisticated hunting behaviors of any apex predator. Different orca populations have developed distinct hunting cultures, passed down through generations like human traditions. Some populations specialize in hunting marine mammals, using coordinated attacks to capture seals or even other whale species. Others focus on fish, developing techniques for corralling salmon or herring into tight balls that can be consumed efficiently. The hunting strategies of some orca populations are so specialized that they border on the extraordinary. Off the coast of Argentina, Certain orcas have learned to beach themselves temporarily to capture seal pups from shorelines, a dangerous technique that requires precise timing with wave action. Other populations work together to create waves that wash seals off ice floes, demonstrating problem solving abilities that reflect complex intelligence. Polar bears occupy a unique position as apex predators of the Arctic, equally at home on sea ice and in frigid waters. These massive predators have evolved remarkable adaptations for hunting in one of Earth's most challenging environments. Their hunting success depends heavily on sea ice conditions, as they primarily hunt seals at breathing holes in the ice. A polar bear might wait motionless beside a seal's breathing hole for hours, demonstrating the patience that characterizes many apex predators. The energy demands of maintaining apex predator status are enormous. Large predators require vast hunting territories to support themselves, often ranging over hundreds of square miles. A single tiger might require a territory exceeding 100 square miles, while polar bears may range over areas larger than some small countries. These extensive territorial requirements make apex predators particularly vulnerable to habitat fragmentation and human encroachment. The reproductive strategies of apex predators reflect the energy constraints they face. Most have relatively few offspring and invest heavily in parental care. Wolf pups remain with their parents for nearly 2 years, learning the complex social and hunting behaviors essential for survival. Eagle chicks spend months in the nest, developing the strength and skills needed for aerial hunting. This extended parental investment reflects the difficulty of mastering the skills needed to succeed as a top predator. Some apex predators demonstrate remarkable longevity, with individuals accumulating decades of hunting experience and ecological knowledge. Ancient sharks may live for centuries, while some eagles and large cats can survive for several decades in the wild. This longevity allows apex predators to weather temporary fluctuations in prey availability and to pass learned behaviors to younger generations. The seasonal patterns of apex predator activity often reflect the availability of their prey species. Arctic foxes time their reproduction to coincide with peak lemming populations, while many bird species migrate vast distances following the movements of their preferred prey. These temporal patterns create pulses of predation pressure that ripple through entire food webs. Climate change poses particular challenges for apex predators, as their position at the top of food webs makes them vulnerable to changes at any level below them. Polar bears face obvious challenges as sea ice diminishes, but even temperate apex predators feel the effects as changing weather patterns alter the distribution and abundance of their prey species. The removal of apex predators from ecosystems can trigger cascading effects that completely reshape ecological communities. Without wolves, deer populations can explode, leading to overgrazing that eliminates understory vegetation and reduces forest regeneration. The absence of sharks can allow certain fish populations to grow unchecked, potentially devastating the marine organisms those fish consume. As we contemplate these magnificent apex predators, we see in them the final expression of energy that began its journey with photosynthesis in primary producers. Each apex predator represents the accumulated energy of countless organisms, concentrated and refined through multiple trophic transfers. They stand as testament to both the efficiency of natural energy conversion and the fundamental limitations that govern all ecological systems. Yet even these apex predators are part of a larger cycle. When their lives end, their bodies will return to the ecosystem, beginning the next phase in the endless circulation of energy and nutrients that connects all living things. In the quiet depths of a forest floor, beneath layers of fallen leaves that crackle softly underfoot, an invisible workforce toils ceaselessly in the darkness. Here, among the decomposing logs and scattered twigs, bacteria and fungi carry out one of nature's most essential yet overlooked processes. They are the recyclers of life, the organisms that complete the great circle of energy and nutrients, transforming death back into the raw materials for new life. Without their patient, methodical work, the world would quickly become buried under an ever growing mountain of organic debris. The forest floor tells the story of decomposition in layers, each representing a different stage in the breakdown of organic matter. Fresh leaves, recently fallen and still retaining their original colors and shapes, rest atop partially decomposed material that has begun to lose its structure. Beneath this lies a darker layer where plant matter has become nearly unrecognizable, and deeper still, rich black humus represents the final product of complete decomposition, ready to nourish the next generation of plants. Fungi serve as the forest's primary decomposers, their thread like hyphae penetrating deep into dead wood and leaf litter. These remarkable organisms can break down some of the most stubborn organic compounds, including lignin, the complex polymer that gives wood its strength and durability. A fallen tree trunk might take decades to completely decompose, but fungi work tirelessly throughout this process, slowly converting the tree's stored energy back into forms that other organisms can use. The mushrooms we occasionally notice, pushing up through leaf litter, represent only the reproductive structures of vast underground fungal networks. The main body of the fungus consists of microscopic threads that spread through the soil like an underground internet, connecting plants across large distances and facilitating the exchange of nutrients and chemical signals. Some fungal networks can span hundreds of acres, making them among the largest living organisms on Earth. Bacteria work alongside fungi as nature's molecular disassembly teams, while fungi excel at breaking down complex structural compounds. Bacteria specialize in processing simpler organic molecules and completing the final stages of decomposition. Bacterial communities in soil are incredibly diverse, with different species optimized for different chemical environments and different types of organic matter. The process of bacterial decomposition generates heat, which explains why compost piles can become warm to the touch despite being composed entirely of organic waste. In natural settings, this heat production is more subtle but equally important, helping to maintain soil temperature and creating microclimates that support different communities of soil organisms. Earthworms represent another crucial component of the decomposition system, though they work through very different mechanisms than fungi and bacteria. These industrious invertebrates consume organic matter and soil, processing both through their digestive systems and depositing nutrient rich castings that dramatically improve soil quality. A single earthworm can process its own body weight in organic matter every day, and earthworm populations can move several tons of soil per acre annually. The digestive system of an earthworm functions like a living laboratory for decomposition. Organic matter is ground up by muscular action, mixed with enzymes and beneficial bacteria, and transformed into a form that plants can readily absorb. Earthworm castings contain significantly higher concentrations of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium than surrounding soil, creating local hotspots of fertility that support vigorous plant growth. In aquatic environments, decomposition takes on different characteristics but serves the same fundamental purpose. When a fish dies in a lake or ocean, it becomes food for a succession of scavengers and decomposers. Larger scavengers like crabs or crayfish might consume soft tissues, while bacteria work on what remains. Eventually, even the skeleton dissolves or becomes incorporated into sediments, completing the aquatic version of the decomposition cycle. Marine environments host some particularly specialized decomposers. Whale falls, the carcasses of large whales that sink to the ocean floor, create unique ecosystems that can persist for decades. These massive accumulations of organic matter support entire communities of specialized bacteria, worms, and other organisms that exist nowhere else on Earth. The decomposition of a single whale can sustain deep sea life for 50 years or more, creating islands of productivity in the nutrient poor depths. The rate of decomposition varies dramatically depending on environmental conditions. In hot, humid, tropical environments, organic matter breaks down rapidly, sometimes disappearing within months. The constant warmth and moisture create ideal conditions for bacterial and fungal activity, leading to rapid nutrient cycling but relatively thin soil layers as organic matter is processed almost as quickly as it accumulates. In contrast, cold environments dramatically slow decomposition rates. In Arctic tundra, organic matter can persist for years or even decades before fully breaking down. The cold temperatures reduce bacterial activity, and the short growing seasons limit the time available for decomposition. This leads to the accumulation of partially decomposed organic matter in layers called permafrost, creating vast stores of carbon that remain locked away for thousands of years. Wetland environments present unique decomposition challenges. In waterlogged soils, where oxygen is scarce, decomposition shifts from aerobic to anaerobic processes. Anaerobic decomposition proceeds much more slowly and produces different end products, including methane gas. Peat bogs represent extreme examples of this process, where organic matter accumulates faster than it can decompose, creating thick layers of partially decayed plant material. Some decomposers have evolved remarkable specializations for processing specific types of organic matter. Certain bacteria can break down petroleum products, making them valuable for environmental cleanup efforts. Other bacterial species specialize in processing cellulose, working in partnership with animals like termites to digest plant material that would otherwise be impossible to process. The timing of decomposition creates important seasonal patterns in nutrient availability. In temperate forests, the autumn leaf fall provides a massive pulse of organic matter that will be slowly processed throughout the following year. Peak decomposer activity often occurs in late spring and early summer when warm temperatures and adequate moisture create optimal conditions for bacterial and fungal growth. Decomposer communities are remarkably resilient and adaptable. When environmental conditions change, different species within the community can take over the decomposition process. This redundancy helps ensure that the essential process of nutrient recycling continues even when individual species are stressed or eliminated. The chemical transformations carried out by decomposers are extraordinarily complex. Proteins are broken down into amino acids, which are further processed into simpler nitrogen compounds that plants can absorb. Complex carbohydrates are reduced to simple sugars, while fats and oils are converted into fatty acids and glycerol. Throughout these processes, energy is gradually released and either used by the decomposer organisms themselves or dissipated as heat. Soil pH plays a crucial role in determining which decomposers will be most active in any given environment. Acidic soils favor fungal decomposition, while neutral or alkaline soils support more bacterial activity. This relationship between chemistry and decomposer communities helps explain why different ecosystems develop characteristic soil types and nutrient cycling patterns. The work of decomposers extends beyond simple breakdown of organic matter. Many bacterial species in soil produce antibiotics and other compounds that help protect plant roots from disease. Mycorrhizal fungi form partnerships with plant roots, extending the plant's ability to absorb water and nutrients while receiving energy rich compounds in return. These symbiotic relationships blur the line between decomposition and active ecosystem support. Human activities have significant impacts on decomposer communities. Agricultural practices that reduce soil organic matter can limit decomposer populations, while the use of pesticides and fungicides can directly harm beneficial bacteria and fungi. Urban development often destroys the soil layers where decomposers live and work, disrupting local nutrient cycles. The importance of decomposers becomes most apparent when they are absent or impaired. In environments where decomposition is severely limited, organic matter accumulates to unnatural levels, and nutrients become locked away in forms that living plants cannot access. The result is often ecosystem dysfunction, with reduced plant growth and altered community structure. As we reflect on the quiet work of these recyclers, we begin to understand that decomposition is not an ending but a transformation. The magnificent oak tree that eventually falls and decays will nurture countless seedlings. The energy that once powered a soaring eagle will fuel the bacteria that enrich the soil. In the patient work of decomposers, death becomes life, and the great cycles that connect all living things continue their eternal circulation, ensuring that the elements essential for life are never truly lost, but merely borrowed for a time before being returned to support new growth and new possibilities. Deep beneath the forest floor, invisible to our eyes but fundamental to all life, atoms of carbon that once formed part of a towering oak tree begin their next journey. Released by the patient work of decomposers, these carbon atoms drift through soil water, rise into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, or become incorporated into the bodies of soil bacteria. This constant movement of elements through living and non living components of ecosystems represents one of nature's most elegant solutions to the challenge of sustaining life on a finite planet. The biogeochemical cycles that ensure essential nutrients are never lost but continuously recycled. Unlike energy, which flows through ecosystems in one direction and is eventually dissipated as heat, matter follows circular pathways that can theoretically continue forever. The carbon atom in your body today might have been part of a dinosaur millions of years ago, locked in limestone for geological ages, or floating in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide just moments before a plant captured it through photosynthesis. These endless cycles connect all life across both space and time, creating a planetary circulation system that has operated for billions of years. The carbon cycle serves as perhaps the most familiar example of these global circulation patterns. Carbon moves through the atmosphere, biosphere, hydrosphere, and geosphere in transformations that span timescales from seconds to millions of years. When a leaf photosynthesizes, it pulls carbon dioxide from the air and incorporates the carbon into glucose molecules. This carbon might remain in the plant for decades if it becomes part of wood, or it might be released back to the atmosphere within hours if the glucose is used for cellular respiration. The ocean plays a massive role in the global carbon cycle, absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and storing it in multiple forms. Some dissolved carbon dioxide remains in seawater, making the ocean slightly acidic. Marine organisms use dissolved carbon to build shells and skeletons from calcium carbonate, temporarily removing carbon from circulation. When these organisms die, some sink to the deep ocean floor, where their carbon may remain locked away for thousands of years before deep ocean currents eventually return it to the surface. On land, forests represent enormous carbon reservoirs, storing carbon in living wood, leaf litter, and soil organic matter. The Amazon rainforest alone contains more carbon than the entire atmosphere. When forests are cut down or burned, this stored carbon is rapidly released back to the atmosphere, contributing to climate change. Conversely, growing forests act as carbon sinks, removing carbon dioxide from the air and incorporating it into plant tissues and soil. The nitrogen cycle reveals even more complex transformations, involving several different chemical forms of nitrogen that require specialized bacteria to convert between them. Atmospheric nitrogen gas makes up 78% of the air we breathe, but most organisms cannot use nitrogen in this form. Nitrogen fixing bacteria, some living independently in soil, and others forming partnerships with plant roots, possess the remarkable ability to break the strong chemical bonds in nitrogen gas and convert it into ammonia, which plants can absorb and use to build proteins. In agricultural systems, the nitrogen cycle has been dramatically altered by human activities. The invention of the Haber-Bosch process, which artificially fixes atmospheric nitrogen to produce fertilizer, has more than doubled the amount of reactive nitrogen in global circulation. This massive input of nitrogen fertilizer has increased food production, but has also created environmental challenges, including water pollution and the formation of ocean dead zones, where excess nitrogen triggers algal blooms that consume available oxygen. The phosphorus cycle operates differently from carbon and nitrogen cycles because phosphorus has no significant atmospheric component. Instead, phosphorus moves through ecosystems, primarily through weathering of rocks, uptake by plants, consumption by animals, and eventual return to soil through decomposition. This makes phosphorus particularly vulnerable to loss from ecosystems, as there is no atmospheric reservoir to replenish what is removed. Many ecosystems are phosphorus limited, meaning that plant growth is constrained by the availability of this essential nutrient. In tropical rainforests, phosphorus is so scarce that most of it is tied up in living biomass rather than soil. When a tree falls in these forests, other plants quickly colonize the decomposing trunk, capturing the released phosphorus before it can be lost from the system. Water itself participates in perhaps the most visible of all biogeochemical cycles. The hydrologic cycle moves water between oceans, atmosphere, and land through evaporation, transpiration, precipitation, and runoff. Plants play crucial roles in this cycle, with forests acting as massive pumps that lift water from soil to atmosphere through their leaves. A single large tree can transpire hundreds of gallons of water per day, contributing to local humidity and precipitation patterns. The seasonal rhythms of temperate ecosystems create pulses in biogeochemical cycling that ripple through food webs. Spring snowmelt and rainfall create surges of water flow that carry nutrients from terrestrial to aquatic systems. The burst of plant growth in spring represents a massive uptake of carbon, nitrogen, and other nutrients from soil and atmosphere. Autumn leaf fall returns these nutrients to the forest floor, where they will be slowly processed by decomposers throughout the following year. In aquatic systems, thermal stratification creates barriers to nutrient cycling that profoundly influence ecosystem productivity. During summer, many lakes develop distinct layers of warm surface water and cold deep water that do not mix. Nutrients become depleted in surface waters where photosynthesis occurs, while deep waters accumulate nutrients from decomposing organic matter but lack the light needed for plant growth. Only during spring and fall turnovers, when temperature differences disappear and water layers mix, can these nutrients return to productive surface waters. Ocean currents drive global scale biogeochemical cycles that connect ecosystems thousands of miles apart. The Gulf Stream carries warm, nutrient poor water northward along the eastern coast of North America, while cold, nutrient rich water sinks in the North Atlantic and flows southward along the ocean floor. These deep waters may not return to the surface for hundreds of years, carrying their nutrients on a journey that spans the globe before eventually upwelling in distant oceans to support marine productivity. Human activities have dramatically altered natural biogeochemical cycles in ways that are only beginning to be understood. The burning of fossil fuels has increased atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations by more than 40% since pre industrial times. Industrial nitrogen fixation has doubled the amount of reactive nitrogen in circulation. Mining and agriculture have accelerated the movement of phosphorus from geological reservoirs into ecosystems and waterways. These changes in biogeochemical cycling have cascading effects throughout food webs. Increased carbon dioxide levels enhance photosynthesis in some plants, but also contribute to climate change that alters precipitation patterns and temperature regimes. Excess nitrogen can shift plant community composition, favoring fast growing species that can take advantage of abundant nutrients while competitively excluding plants adapted to low nitrogen conditions. The concept of nutrient limitation helps explain why biogeochemical cycles are so crucial to food web structure. In most ecosystems, one or more nutrients limit plant growth, which in turn limits the energy available to support herbivores and higher trophic levels. Understanding these limiting factors allows ecologists to predict how changes in nutrient cycling might affect entire food webs. Some organisms have evolved remarkable adaptations to cope with nutrient limitations. Carnivorous plants like Venus flytraps and pitcher plants supplement their nutrient intake by capturing and digesting insects, allowing them to thrive in nutrient poor soils where other plants struggle. These plants represent a fascinating intersection between biogeochemical cycling and food web dynamics, as they effectively function as both producers and consumers in their ecosystems. Mycorrhizal fungi create underground networks that facilitate nutrient exchange between plants, effectively extending the reach of plant root systems and creating more efficient nutrient cycling. These fungal networks can transfer nitrogen from nitrogen rich areas to nitrogen poor areas, and they can even transfer nutrients between different plant species. Recent research suggests that these networks may also facilitate communication between plants, allowing them to share information about environmental threats. The study of biogeochemical cycles reveals the fundamental interconnectedness of all life on Earth. The calcium in our bones may have once been part of ancient marine shells. The nitrogen in our DNA was probably fixed from the atmosphere by bacteria in soil or root nodules. The water in our cells has participated in countless cycles through oceans, clouds, and living organisms over billions of years. As we consider these endless cycles, we begin to understand that ecosystems are not just collections of organisms, but integrated systems where the movement of matter links every component. The health of any ecosystem depends not just on the species it contains, but on the efficiency of the cycles that connect them, ensuring that the raw materials of life remain available for each new generation of organisms to discover and use. In the soft glow of morning light filtering through a forest canopy, we witness one of the universe's most fundamental truths. Energy always flows in one direction. While nutrients cycle endlessly through ecosystems, moving from soil to plant to animal and back again, energy follows a different path entirely. It enters ecosystems as sunlight, passes through a series of transformations as it moves up food chains, and ultimately dissipates as heat into the vast emptiness of space, never to return in the same form. This one way journey of energy represents one of the most important principles governing all life on Earth. Unlike the circular pathways followed by carbon, nitrogen, and other elements, energy cannot be recycled. Once the chemical bonds in a glucose molecule are broken to power cellular processes, that energy becomes heat and is lost forever to biological systems. This fundamental constraint shapes every aspect of ecosystem structure, determining how many trophic levels can exist, how much biomass each level can support, and why energy pyramids consistently narrow as they rise toward apex predators. To understand energy flow through ecosystems, we must first appreciate the concept of thermodynamics as it applies to living systems. The first law of thermodynamics tells us that energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed from one form to another. The second law reveals the crucial constraint. Each time energy is transformed, some becomes unavailable for further use, typically released as heat. In ecological terms, this means that every transfer of energy through food webs results in a net loss of usable energy. Consider the journey of energy captured by a blade of grass through photosynthesis. Of the solar energy striking the leaf, perhaps only 2 to 3% is actually captured and converted into chemical bonds in glucose molecules. The remaining 97% is immediately lost as heat or reflected back to the atmosphere. This captured energy now represents the maximum amount available to support all the organisms that might eventually consume this grass, either directly or indirectly. When a grasshopper feeds on this blade of grass, the energy transfer becomes even less efficient. The insect cannot digest and absorb all the plant material it consumes. Much passes through its digestive system unused. Of the energy that is absorbed, a significant portion must be used immediately for the grasshopper's own metabolic processes, maintaining body temperature, powering muscle contractions, running cellular machinery. Only about 10% of the energy originally stored in the grass becomes incorporated into the grasshopper's own tissues as growth. This 10% rule, while not exact in all situations, provides a useful approximation for understanding energy transfer efficiency between trophic levels. When a spider catches and consumes the grasshopper, approximately 10% of the energy stored in the insect's body becomes available to the spider. If a bird then catches the spider, another 90% of the energy is lost, with only 10% becoming part of the bird's biomass. By the time energy reaches a hawk that might prey on the bird, we're looking at roughly 0.01% 1% of the original energy captured by the grass. These losses explain why energy pyramids have their characteristic shape, wide at the base and narrowing dramatically with each successive level. The broad foundation of primary producers must capture enormous amounts of solar energy to support the much smaller biomass of herbivores above them. In turn, the herbivore level must be much larger than the carnivore level it supports. This pyramid structure is not arbitrary, but represents a fundamental constraint imposed by the laws of physics. The implications of energy flow become clear when we examine actual ecosystem measurements. In a typical grassland, primary producers might achieve a net primary productivity of 1,000 grams of biomass per square meter per year. The herbivores feeding on this vegetation might produce only 100 grams per square meter annually, while secondary consumers reach perhaps 10 grams per square meter. Tertiary consumers, if they exist at all in the system, might achieve less than 1 gram per square meter per year. These energy constraints help explain why large predators are relatively rare in any ecosystem. A single mountain lion requires a territory of 50 to 100 square miles to find enough prey to survive. This enormous area reflects not just the need to find prey, but the fundamental inefficiency of energy transfer through food webs. The mountain lion represents the accumulated energy from thousands of deer, which in turn consume the energy from millions of plants spread across vast areas. Marine ecosystems demonstrate these same principles, but with some interesting variations. In the open ocean, the primary producers are microscopic phytoplankton that have very short lifespans, sometimes reproducing several times per week. Despite their small size, these organisms collectively achieve enormous productivity, forming the base of food webs that support everything from tiny copepods to massive blue whales. The efficiency of energy transfer in marine systems can sometimes exceed the typical 10% rule, particularly in food chains with fewer intermediate steps. The concept of biomass pyramids helps visualize these energy relationships. In most terrestrial ecosystems, the biomass of producers far exceeds that of primary consumers, which exceeds that of secondary consumers, and so on. However, in some aquatic systems, we occasionally see inverted pyramids where the biomass of consumers temporarily exceeds that of producers. This apparent contradiction occurs when producers reproduce so rapidly that their high turnover rate supports a larger standing biomass of longer lived consumers. Seasonal patterns in energy flow create temporal variations in ecosystem productivity. In temperate regions, spring and summer represent periods of high energy capture as plants take advantage of warm temperatures and long daylight hours. This energy pulse supports breeding seasons for many animals when the energy demands of reproduction and raising young are highest. Autumn often brings a period of energy storage as many organisms accumulate reserves for winter survival. Winter represents a period of minimal energy flow, when most plants are dormant and many animals rely on stored energy or migrate to more productive regions. The efficiency of energy capture varies dramatically among different types of primary producers. Some plants, particularly those using specialized photosynthetic pathways adapted to hot, dry conditions, can achieve energy conversion rates of 4 to 5% under optimal conditions. Forest ecosystems often show lower conversion rates, but make up for this with their enormous leaf area and year-round photosynthesis. Agricultural systems, with their carefully selected crops and optimal growing conditions, sometimes achieve the highest energy conversion rates of any ecosystems. Different organisms have evolved various strategies to maximize their energy intake or minimize their energy expenditures. Some predators, like spiders, invest energy in building webs that can capture prey with minimal ongoing energy cost. Others, like ambush predators, minimize energy expenditure by remaining motionless for long periods, striking only when high value prey comes within range. Migration represents another energy strategy, where animals expend enormous amounts of energy traveling to locations where food will be more abundant. The relationship between body size and energy requirements creates another constraint on ecosystem structure. Larger animals require more total energy but use it more efficiently per unit of body weight. An elephant needs thousands of times more food than a mouse, but its metabolic rate per gram of body weight is much lower. This relationship helps explain why ecosystems can support many small organisms, but only a few large ones at any given trophic level. Human activities have dramatically altered natural patterns of energy flow through ecosystems. Agriculture concentrates energy flow into systems optimized for human food production, often supporting much higher productivity than natural systems, but with greatly reduced biodiversity. Urban environments create novel energy flows, with human inputs of food and fuel supporting organisms in patterns that would be impossible in natural systems. Climate change affects energy flow by altering the conditions under which primary producers operate. Higher temperatures can increase photosynthetic rates in some plants, but may also increase respiration rates, reducing net energy capture. Changes in precipitation patterns affect plant productivity, while shifting seasonal timing can disrupt the coordination between energy pulses and the life cycles of organisms that depend on them. Understanding energy flow helps explain why ecosystem conservation requires protecting large areas and maintaining connections between habitats. The energy requirements of top predators mean that their conservation depends not just on suitable habitat, but on vast areas of productive ecosystem to support the prey species they depend on. Fragmenting habitats disrupts energy flow pathways and can lead to the loss of species at higher trophic levels. As we contemplate this one way journey of energy through the living world, we see both the elegance and the constraints of natural systems. Energy connects every organism to the sun, creating a web of dependencies that spans from the smallest bacteria to the largest whales. Yet this same energy flow imposes limits, ensuring that ecosystems develop predictable structures governed by the inexorable laws of thermodynamics. In the depths of a kelp forest off the California coast, a sea otter floats on its back, methodically cracking open a sea urchin with a stone balanced on its chest. This simple scene represents something far more intricate than it first appears. The otter's dining habits connect it not just to the urchin it's consuming, but to the kelp forest itself, to the fish that shelter among the kelp fronds, to the bacteria that decompose fallen kelp, and to countless other organisms and relationships so intertwined that the removal of any single species can reshape the entire underwater landscape. Real ecosystems rarely organize themselves into the neat, linear chains we've been exploring. Instead, they form complex webs where energy and nutrients flow along multiple pathways, creating networks of relationships that can seem almost impossibly intricate. These food webs represent nature's solution to the challenges of unpredictability, seasonal change, and resource scarcity. By creating multiple connections between species, ecosystems develop resilience and stability that simple linear chains cannot provide. Consider the web of relationships surrounding a single oak tree in a temperate forest. The tree's leaves support dozens of species of caterpillars, each specialized to feed on specific compounds within the oak's foliage. These caterpillars, in turn, provide food for multiple species of birds, spiders, and parasitic wasps. The oak's acorns feed squirrels, chipmunks, deer, and wild turkeys, while also serving as nurseries for acorn weevil larvae. The tree's bark harbors insects that attract woodpeckers, while its hollow cavities might shelter owls, bats, or raccoons. But these relationships extend far beyond simple predator prey interactions. The oak tree depends on squirrels and jays to bury its acorns in locations suitable for germination. Mycorrhizal fungi associated with the tree's roots exchange nutrients with other plants across the forest floor. The tree's fallen leaves become substrate for decomposer communities that recycle nutrients back to the soil. Even in death, the oak continues to participate in the web, its decomposing wood supporting specialized beetles, fungi, and eventually enriching the soil for future generations of plants. The complexity of food webs becomes even more apparent when we consider omnivory, the practice of feeding at multiple trophic levels. Many animals that we typically think of as herbivores also consume animal matter when the opportunity arises. Bears epitomize this flexibility, eating berries, salmon, insects, small mammals, and roots depending on seasonal availability and local conditions. This dietary versatility allows bears to survive in environments where specialist feeders might struggle, but it also creates complex patterns of energy flow that defy simple categorization. Marine food webs demonstrate remarkable structural complexity, partly due to the three-dimensional nature of aquatic environments and the vastly different sizes of organisms involved. Microscopic phytoplankton support not only tiny zooplankton, but also massive filter-feeding whales that can consume millions of these minute organisms in a single gulp. Meanwhile, the same waters might contain food chains extending from bacteria through multiple levels of fish predators to sharks or marine mammals. The seasonal nature of many food web connections adds another layer of complexity. Arctic ecosystems showcase this temporal dimension dramatically. During the brief summer months, the tundra explodes with life as migratory birds arrive to take advantage of abundant insects, which in turn depend on the pulse of plant growth that follows snowmelt. These same insects support resident predators like spiders and Arctic foxes, while also serving as food for the young of birds that will migrate thousands of miles before winter returns. Many species play different roles in food webs depending on their life stage, creating what ecologists call ontogenetic niche shifts. A frog begins its life as an herbivorous tadpole, filtering algae and plant matter from pond water. As it metamorphoses, it becomes a carnivorous adult, feeding on insects and other small prey. This transformation means that a single species participates in entirely different parts of the food web during its lifetime, complicating our understanding of energy flow and species interactions. Some organisms serve as critical connectors in food webs, linking different habitats or ecosystem components that might otherwise remain separate. Salmon represent perhaps the most spectacular example of this connectivity. Born in freshwater streams, they mature in the ocean before returning to their natal waters to spawn and die. Their migration carries marine-derived nutrients far inland, supporting not just the stream ecosystems where they spawn, but entire forests through the nitrogen and phosphorus their decomposing bodies provide. The concept of keystone species emerges from food web complexity, describing organisms whose influence on ecosystem structure far exceeds what their abundance might suggest. Beavers serve as ecological engineers, creating wetland habitats that support dozens of species that couldn't survive in flowing water environments. Their dam building activities alter hydrology across entire watersheds, affecting everything from water table levels to the species composition of plant communities miles away. In coral reef ecosystems, cleaner fish species occupy unique positions in food webs, providing essential services to multiple predator species. These small fish remove parasites and dead tissue from larger fish, creating temporary truces that suspend normal predator prey relationships. Cleaning stations become neutral territories where species that would normally avoid each other gather peacefully, creating some of the most remarkable behavioral displays in the natural world. Food web complexity helps explain the stability of mature ecosystems. When multiple species fill similar ecological roles, the loss of one species can be compensated by the expansion of others. This functional redundancy provides insurance against environmental disturbances and helps ecosystems maintain their essential processes even when individual components change. However, this stability depends on maintaining sufficient complexity as simplified ecosystems become increasingly vulnerable to disruption. The study of food webs reveals surprising indirect effects that can cascade through multiple trophic levels. The decline of sea otters in some Pacific coastal areas allowed sea urchin populations to explode, leading to overgrazing of kelp forests and eventual collapse of these underwater ecosystems. The loss of kelp habitat then affected dozens of fish species, which in turn impacted their predators, demonstrating how changes at one point in a food web can reverberate throughout the entire system. Human activities often simplify natural food webs, creating systems dominated by fewer species and characterized by less complex interaction networks. Agricultural landscapes replace diverse plant communities with monocultures, supporting simplified food webs that may be more productive in the short term but are also more vulnerable to pests, diseases, and environmental changes. The challenge for sustainable agriculture lies in maintaining enough complexity to provide natural pest control and ecosystem services while still achieving economic productivity. Climate change adds new dimensions to food web complexity by altering the timing of biological events and shifting the geographic ranges of species. When the life cycles of interdependent species become mismatched, food web connections can be disrupted. Arctic food webs face particular challenges as warming temperatures alter the timing of sea ice formation, affecting everything from polar bear hunting success to the availability of algae beneath the ice. The invasion of non-native species creates novel food web interactions that can have unpredictable consequences. Sometimes invasive species integrate into existing food webs with minimal disruption. Other times, they create entirely new interaction patterns or disrupt existing relationships in ways that cascade through the entire system. The zebra mussel invasion of North American freshwater systems demonstrates how a single introduced species can alter water chemistry, reshape benthic communities, and affect food availability for native fish and waterfowl. Understanding food web complexity requires sophisticated analytical tools and long-term studies that can capture the full range of species interactions. Researchers use techniques ranging from stable isotope analysis, which reveals actual feeding relationships, to network theory, which helps identify critical nodes and connections within complex interaction webs. These studies consistently reveal that ecosystems are far more interconnected than traditional linear food chain models suggest. The complexity of natural food webs offers both inspiration and caution as we consider human impacts on natural systems. The intricate connections that provide stability and resilience to ecosystems also mean that seemingly small changes can have far reaching consequences. As we move forward to explore how environmental factors shape these complex webs, we carry with us an appreciation for the delicate balance that emerges from countless individual relationships, each playing its part in the grand symphony of ecological interconnection. On a windswept mountainside in the Rocky Mountains, the tree line marks a boundary as sharp as any drawn on a map. Below this elevation, dense forests of spruce and fir climb steadily up the slopes. Above it, only hardy alpine plants can survive the harsh conditions of thin air, intense solar radiation, and brutal winter winds. This dramatic transition illustrates how environmental factors weave themselves into the very fabric of food webs, determining not just which species can survive in any given location, but how they interact when they reproduce, and how energy flows through the system. Temperature serves as perhaps the most fundamental environmental thread shaping food web structure. Every biological process, from the photosynthetic reactions in plant leaves to the muscle contractions of a hunting predator, depends on enzymes that function optimally within narrow temperature ranges. As temperatures drop toward freezing, metabolic processes slow dramatically, reducing the energy available for growth and reproduction. In Arctic environments, this thermal constraint compresses the entire growing season into a few brief months when temperatures rise above the threshold for biological activity. The temperature tolerance of different species creates predictable patterns in food web structure across latitudinal gradients. Tropical food webs, operating year round in warm conditions, can support complex multi level structures with numerous specialized predators. Arctic food webs, constrained by cold temperatures and brief growing seasons, tend to be simpler, with fewer trophic levels and species that must be generalists to survive the harsh conditions. Water availability acts as another master thread in the environmental tapestry, particularly in terrestrial ecosystems. Desert food webs are characterized by their efficiency and specialization, as organisms have evolved remarkable adaptations to survive in water limited environments. Plants concentrate their photosynthetic activity into brief periods following rare rainfall events. Animals obtain water from their food or have evolved specialized kidneys that produce highly concentrated urine to minimize water loss. The seasonal patterns of precipitation create pulses in desert ecosystems that cascade through entire food webs. When winter rains arrive in the Sonoran Desert, dormant seeds germinate en masse, creating carpets of wildflowers that support temporary explosions of insect populations. These insect blooms, in turn, attract migratory birds and support resident predators through crucial breeding seasons. Within weeks, as the soil dries and plants complete their life cycles, the desert returns to its austere baseline, with most organisms entering dormancy or relying on cached resources. Soil chemistry profoundly influences food web structure by determining which plants can establish and thrive in any given location. Acidic soils favor different plant communities than alkaline soils, creating distinct assemblages of herbivores and their associated predators. Serpentine soils, rich in heavy metals that are toxic to most plants, support specialized plant communities that have evolved tolerance to these harsh chemical conditions. These unique plant assemblages support food webs found nowhere else, demonstrating how soil chemistry can create islands of endemism within broader landscapes. The pH of aquatic environments creates similar constraints on food web development. Acidic lakes, whether naturally occurring or created by acid rain, support dramatically different communities than neutral or alkaline waters. Many fish species cannot survive in highly acidic conditions, leading to simplified food webs dominated by acid tolerant invertebrates and specialized bacteria. As lake pH changes, either through natural processes or human impacts, entire food webs can shift in composition and structure. Light availability creates vertical zonation in both terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems, with different food web components operating at different levels. In forests, the canopy intercepts most available sunlight, supporting specialized communities of epiphytes, insects, and arboreal vertebrates. The understory operates under different light conditions, favoring shade tolerant plants and the animals that depend on them. The forest floor, receiving less than 1% of the light reaching the canopy, supports food webs based primarily on decomposition rather than photosynthesis. Aquatic systems show even more dramatic light based stratification. The photic zone, where sufficient light penetrates to support photosynthesis, teems with plankton based food webs. Below this lies the aphotic zone, where food webs depend entirely on organic matter raining down from surface waters. In the deepest ocean trenches, chemosynthetic bacteria replace photosynthetic organisms as primary producers, creating food webs that operate independently of solar energy. Disturbance regimes represent another crucial environmental thread, creating temporal patterns that shape food web dynamics. Fire frequency and intensity determine the structure of plant communities in fire prone ecosystems, which in turn influences the animal communities they support. Frequent, low intensity fires favor grassland food webs, while less frequent, high intensity fires support forest systems with entirely different species assemblages and interaction networks. Flooding cycles in riverine systems create similar patterns of disturbance and recovery. Spring floods scour river channels and reset aquatic communities, while also depositing nutrient rich sediments in floodplains that support terrestrial food webs. Species that have evolved with these flood cycles depend on the disturbance for successful reproduction and ecosystem function. Ocean currents act as massive environmental threads connecting food webs across vast distances. The Gulf Stream carries warm water and associated plankton communities northward along the eastern coast of North America, supporting food webs in regions that would otherwise be too cold for many tropical species. Upwelling zones, where deep, nutrient rich water rises to the surface, create some of the most productive marine food webs on Earth, supporting massive fisheries and dense concentrations of marine life. Seasonal environmental changes create temporal shifts in food web structure that require remarkable flexibility from participating organisms. In temperate regions, the dramatic differences between summer and winter conditions essentially create two different food webs operating in the same location at different times. Many species respond by migrating, hibernating, or dramatically changing their diets and behavior patterns. Climate variability on longer timescales creates boom and bust cycles that ripple through food webs. El Nino events dramatically alter ocean temperatures and current patterns, affecting marine food webs across the Pacific. These changes cascade onto land through seabird colonies, which may experience massive reproductive failures when their oceanic food sources disappear. The recovery of these systems can take years, illustrating how environmental variability creates long term instability in ecological relationships. Atmospheric composition increasingly represents a novel environmental thread as human activities alter the chemical makeup of the air. Rising carbon dioxide concentrations affect plant photosynthesis and growth patterns, potentially altering the foundation of terrestrial food webs. Some plants respond to elevated CO2 with increased growth, while others show little response or even decreased nutritional quality, creating complex cascading effects through herbivore populations. Pollution introduces entirely artificial environmental threads that can disrupt established food web relationships. Heavy metals accumulate in sediments and bioconcentrate as they move up food chains, often reaching toxic levels in top predators. Pesticides can eliminate crucial pollinators or decomposers, creating gaps in food webs that affect species far removed from the original target organisms. The fragmentation of habitats by human development creates environmental edges that alter food web dynamics. Edge effects extend varying distances into forest patches, changing light levels, temperature, and humidity patterns that favor different species assemblages. These altered conditions can disrupt established predator prey relationships and create opportunities for invasive species to establish themselves. Microclimate variations within ecosystems create fine scale environmental threads that support remarkable diversity in food web structure. A fallen log in a forest creates its own microenvironment with different temperature and moisture conditions that support specialized decomposer communities. These microhabitats contribute to overall ecosystem complexity by providing refuge for species during unfavorable conditions and serving as stepping stones for dispersal. The interactions between different environmental factors often create nonlinear effects on food web structure. The combination of temperature and moisture determines productivity patterns, but the specific combination matters more than either factor alone. Similarly, the timing of environmental changes relative to organism life cycles can determine whether species can successfully reproduce and maintain their populations. Understanding these environmental threads helps explain why conservation efforts must consider not just individual species, but entire environmental contexts. Protecting habitats means maintaining the complex web of environmental conditions that support natural food web relationships. As climate change and human activities continue to alter these environmental patterns, the challenge becomes predicting and managing the cascading effects through interconnected ecological systems. In the pre dawn darkness of the Serengeti, a lioness begins to stir, her golden eyes reflecting the faint starlight as she surveys the sleeping savanna. Around her, the night shift of predators is giving way to the day shift in an ancient rhythm that has governed African grasslands for millions of years. Nocturnal hunters like leopards and hyenas retreat to shaded rest areas, while diurnal species prepare for their period of activity. This daily changing of the guard represents just one layer of the complex temporal patterns that govern when, where, and how organisms feed. Time moves through ecosystems like a conductor directing an orchestra, coordinating the feeding activities of countless species into patterns that minimize direct competition while maximizing the efficient use of available resources. These rhythms operate at multiple scales, from the hourly patterns of flower opening and pollinator activity to the decades long cycles of forest succession that completely restructure entire food webs. The most obvious temporal pattern in feeding behavior follows the daily cycle of light and darkness. Diurnal species take advantage of daylight hours when visual hunting is most effective and when many plants open their flowers or produce nectar. Hawks circle overhead during the warmth of midday thermals, scanning for movement in the grass below. Hummingbirds begin their feeding circuits at dawn, timing their visits to coincide with peak nectar production in their preferred flowers. As twilight approaches, a different cast of characters emerges. Bats stream from their roosts in coordinated waves, some species targeting flying insects, while others visit night blooming flowers. Owls begin their silent patrol of forest edges and open meadows, their exceptional hearing allowing them to locate prey in complete darkness. Nocturnal mammals like foxes and raccoons emerge from their dens to begin their nightly foraging expeditions. Many plants have evolved to time their reproductive activities to specific periods when their preferred pollinators are most active. Evening primrose flowers open only at dusk, releasing their fragrance to attract night-flying moths. Morning glory flowers open with the sunrise but close by, midday, concentrating their nectar rewards during the brief window when their bee pollinators are most active. These temporal partnerships create feeding schedules that species must follow precisely or risk missing crucial resources. The crepuscular hours of dawn and dusk represent periods of particularly intense activity in many ecosystems. These transitional times offer unique advantages for both predators and prey. Light levels are low enough to provide cover for ambush predators, but sufficient for visual hunting. Many prey species are active during these hours, moving between daytime hiding spots and nighttime feeding areas. The overlap of diurnal and nocturnal species creates brief periods of maximum diversity in feeding activity. Tidal rhythms create another layer of temporal complexity in coastal ecosystems, where feeding opportunities follow the twice daily cycle of rising and falling waters. Shorebirds time their feeding to coincide with low tides, when beaches expose vast areas of mudflats teeming with invertebrate prey. Different species of sandpipers and plovers have evolved bill shapes and feeding techniques that allow them to exploit different prey items, reducing competition even when feeding in the same area at the same time. Rocky intertidal zones experience dramatic changes in feeding opportunities as tides ebb and flow. During high tide, marine predators like fish and crabs can move freely among the rocks, feeding on attached organisms like barnacles and mussels. As the tide recedes, these same rocks become hunting grounds for terrestrial predators like shorebirds and sea otters, while the marine organisms must survive hours of exposure to air and sun until the next high tide returns. Monthly lunar cycles influence feeding patterns in many species, particularly those in marine environments. Some fish species spawn only during specific moon phases, creating temporary feeding opportunities for predators that time their movements to coincide with these reproductive gatherings. Coral reefs experience synchronized spawning events timed to lunar cycles, releasing enormous quantities of eggs and sperm that support temporary blooms of planktonic feeders. Seasonal changes create the most dramatic temporal patterns in feeding relationships, essentially creating different food webs that operate in the same location at different times of year. Spring in temperate regions brings an explosion of plant growth that supports massive increases in herbivorous insect populations. These insects, in turn, fuel the breeding activities of numerous bird species, that time their nesting to coincide with peak food availability. The timing of migration represents one of the most spectacular examples of temporal coordination in feeding relationships. Arctic terns travel from Arctic to Antarctic and back each year, following the global summer and ensuring they always have access to productive feeding areas. Their migration routes take them over some of the most productive marine areas on Earth, allowing them to fuel their journey while taking advantage of seasonal peaks in oceanic productivity. In deciduous forests, autumn represents a critical period when many species must prepare for the resource scarcity of winter. Squirrels frantically cache acorns and nuts, creating thousands of small food stores scattered throughout their territories. Bears consume enormous quantities of salmon, berries, and nuts to build the fat reserves that will sustain them through hibernation. These autumn feeding frenzies represent the compression of annual energy acquisition into a few critical months. Winter creates entirely different feeding challenges and opportunities. Snow cover eliminates many food sources, but also concentrates others. Seed eating birds flock to areas where wind has exposed grass heads or where trees retain their fruits. Predators like foxes and coyotes focus their hunting on areas where prey animals concentrate around available food sources or shelter. Some species have evolved to take advantage of the reduced competition during winter months. Crossbills time their breeding to coincide with winter seed availability in conifer forests, when cone crops provide abundant food and most other bird species have migrated to warmer regions. This temporal strategy allows crossbills to exploit a resource that is largely unavailable to other species. Long term environmental cycles create feeding patterns that span multiple years or even decades. Mast years, when oak trees produce enormous acorn crops, occur irregularly and support temporary explosions in populations of acorn dependent species like deer, turkeys, and squirrels. These population booms then influence predator populations in subsequent years, creating cascading effects that can take decades to fully play out. Forest succession creates the longest term temporal patterns in terrestrial food webs. Early successional habitats support food webs dominated by fast growing plants and the herbivores and predators that specialize on them. As forests mature, the understory becomes more shaded, favoring different plant species and their associated animal communities. Old growth forests develop unique feeding relationships that depend on the structural complexity that takes centuries to develop. Climate change is disrupting many of these carefully coordinated temporal patterns. Earlier spring warming is causing plants to flower before their pollinators emerge from winter dormancy. Birds that time their migration to historical food availability patterns may arrive to find that peak resources now occur weeks earlier than in the past. These phenological mismatches can lead to reproductive failures and population declines as species struggle to adapt to rapidly changing timing cues. Ocean warming is altering the timing of marine productivity cycles, affecting everything from phytoplankton blooms to fish spawning. These changes cascade up through marine food webs, influencing the feeding success of seabirds, marine mammals, and coastal predators that depend on predictable seasonal patterns of oceanic productivity. Human activities have created novel temporal patterns in feeding relationships. Artificial lighting extends the activity periods of some species while disrupting the natural rhythms of others. Urban environments create year round food sources through bird feeders, garbage, and landscaping that can support higher population densities than natural habitats, but may also create dependencies that make species vulnerable to sudden changes in human behavior. Agricultural cycles create their own temporal patterns with massive seasonal changes in food availability that influence wildlife populations. The harvest of grain crops creates temporary feeding bonanzas for seed eating birds, while agricultural pesticide applications can eliminate insect prey species during critical breeding periods for their predators. Understanding these temporal patterns is crucial for conservation efforts. Protecting feeding habitats requires maintaining not just the right physical conditions, but also the proper timing of resource availability. Climate change adaptation strategies must consider how shifting seasonal patterns will affect species that depend on precise temporal coordination for their feeding and reproductive success. The rhythms of feeding remind us that ecosystems exist not just in space, but in time, with relationships that play out across hours, days, seasons, and years in patterns as complex and beautiful as any symphony. Standing at the edge of the Amazon rainforest, surrounded by the constant hum of insects and the distant calls of howler monkeys, one can sense the incredible density of life that characterizes tropical ecosystems. Here, in a single tree, dozens of species might spend their entire lives without ever touching the ground, participating in aerial food webs that exist nowhere else on Earth. This abundance contrasts sharply with the sparse vegetation of nearby mountain peaks, where only the hardiest organisms can survive in thin air and intense solar radiation. These dramatic differences illustrate how geography shapes food webs, creating unique patterns of energy flow and species interaction across the globe. The latitudinal gradient from equator to poles represents one of the most fundamental patterns in global food web structure. Near the equator, consistent year round temperatures and abundant rainfall support the most complex terrestrial food webs on Earth. Tropical rainforests contain more species per unit area than any other terrestrial ecosystem, with intricate networks of specialized relationships that have evolved over millions of years of climatic stability. In these tropical systems, the sheer number of potential feeding relationships creates food webs of staggering complexity. A single species of ficus tree might support over 100 species of insects, each specialized to feed on different parts of the plant or at different times in its reproductive cycle. These insects, in turn, support multiple levels of predators, from spiders and parasitic wasps to birds and bats. The three-dimensional structure of the forest creates distinct feeding zones, with different communities operating in the canopy, understory, and forest floor. Moving away from the equator, food webs generally become simpler and support fewer species. Temperate forests show less complexity than tropical ones, with more generalist species and simpler interaction networks. The seasonal nature of temperate climates creates food webs that must function differently at various times of year, leading to more flexible feeding relationships and fewer highly specialized interactions. At high latitudes, Arctic and subarctic food webs represent studies in efficiency and resilience. With only brief summer growing seasons and extreme winter conditions, these systems support relatively few species, but those that exist have evolved remarkable adaptations. Arctic food webs often show dramatic population cycles, with predator and prey numbers fluctuating in predictable patterns over periods of several years. The famous lynx snowshoe hare cycle represents just one example of these boom and bust dynamics that characterize many northern ecosystems. Island ecosystems create their own unique patterns in food web structure shaped by isolation, size, and geological history. Large, ancient islands like those of Madagascar or Australia have had millions of years to develop endemic species and specialized feeding relationships found nowhere else on Earth. Madagascar's food webs include lemurs that fill ecological roles occupied by monkeys and apes on other continents, while Australia's marsupial predators represent evolutionary solutions to feeding challenges that differ dramatically from those found elsewhere. Smaller, more recently formed islands support simpler food webs, often lacking entire trophic levels found in continental systems. Many oceanic islands originally had no native terrestrial mammals, leading to food webs dominated by birds, reptiles, and invertebrates. The introduction of mammals to these systems by human activities has often dramatically disrupted these island food webs, leading to extinctions and major reorganizations of feeding relationships. Mountain ecosystems create vertical gradients in food web structure that can be as dramatic as latitudinal changes. At low elevations, mountain food webs often resemble those of surrounding lowland areas. As elevation increases, decreasing temperature and oxygen levels, along with increasing solar radiation, create increasingly harsh conditions that support progressively simpler food webs. Alpine zones near treeline support specialized communities adapted to short growing seasons and extreme weather conditions. The highest mountain peaks support food webs that exist at the very limits of multicellular life. Here, simple communities of hardy plants, insects, and spiders eke out an existence in conditions that approach those found in polar regions. These high altitude systems demonstrate the remarkable ability of life to adapt to extreme conditions, but they also show the fundamental constraints that environmental factors place on food web complexity. Desert food webs across different continents show remarkable convergent evolution, with similar feeding relationships appearing independently in geographically separated arid regions. The deserts of North America, South America, Africa, and Australia all support food webs based on drought tolerant plants and the animals that have adapted to extract water from their food or survive on minimal water intake. However, the specific species filling these roles differ dramatically between continents, reflecting millions of years of separate evolutionary history. Marine food webs show their own geographic patterns, influenced by factors like water temperature, nutrient availability, and ocean currents. Tropical coral reefs support some of the most diverse marine communities on Earth, with complex feeding relationships among hundreds of fish species, invertebrates, and other organisms. The three-dimensional structure of coral reefs creates numerous microhabitats, each supporting specialized feeding guilds. In contrast, polar marine systems show much lower diversity but can support enormous biomass of relatively few species. Antarctic food webs are dominated by krill, small shrimp-like crustaceans that support everything from fish and seabirds to the largest whales on Earth. The seasonal availability of sea ice creates dramatic changes in these polar marine food webs, with some species depending entirely on ice-associated communities for their survival. Open ocean food webs vary dramatically between different oceanic regions. Nutrient-poor tropical oceans support relatively simple food webs based on small phytoplankton and the organisms that feed on them. Upwelling zones, where deep, nutrient rich waters rise to the surface, create some of the most productive marine ecosystems on Earth, supporting complex food webs that include massive fish populations and their predators. Continental differences in food web structure reflect both current environmental conditions and evolutionary history. The grasslands of different continents support similar functional groups of organisms, but with entirely different species. North American prairies evolved with large herds of bison, while African savannas developed with diverse communities of ungulates, including zebras, wildebeest, and antelopes. These different herbivore communities support distinct predator assemblages, creating continent specific food web structures. The isolation of continents for millions of years has led to the evolution of unique predator prey relationships found nowhere else. Australia's marsupial predators, South America's unique mammalian fauna, and Madagascar's lemur dominated ecosystems all represent evolutionary experiments in food web organization that developed in isolation from the mammalian fauna that dominates other continents. Human activities have increasingly homogenized food webs across the globe through the introduction of non native species and the creation of similar habitat types in different regions. Agricultural systems have created novel food webs that share many characteristics regardless of their geographic location. Urban environments support surprisingly similar species assemblages across different continents as cosmopolitan species adapt to human modified environments. Climate change is creating new patterns in global food web distribution as species shift their ranges in response to changing temperature and precipitation patterns. Some food web relationships are moving poleward as their component species track suitable climate conditions. Other interactions are being disrupted as species respond differently to environmental changes, leading to mismatches in timing or geographic distribution. The study of food webs across different biogeographic regions reveals both the remarkable diversity of solutions that evolution has found for organizing energy flow through ecosystems and the fundamental principles that govern these relationships everywhere. While the specific species differ dramatically between regions, the basic patterns of energy transfer, trophic relationships, and ecological interactions show remarkable consistency across the globe. Understanding these geographic patterns in food web structure is crucial for conservation efforts, particularly as human activities and climate change continue to alter the distribution of species and habitats. The unique food webs found in different regions represent millions of years of evolutionary history and adaptation that, once lost, cannot be readily restored or replaced. In a suburban backyard in the early morning hours, a red fox pauses beneath a bird feeder, its keen eyes scanning for dropped seeds and the small songbirds that gather to feed. This scene, commonplace in communities across North America, illustrates a profound truth about modern ecosystems. Human activities have become so pervasive that virtually no food web on Earth remains untouched by our influence. From the birdseed that supplements natural food sources to the urban habitat that provides shelter, human hands now shape the feeding relationships that connect species across the globe. The transformation of natural landscapes represents perhaps the most dramatic way humans have altered food webs. When forests are cleared for agriculture, entire multi layered food webs collapse into simplified systems dominated by crop plants and the limited number of species that can thrive in these modified environments. The complex vertical structure of forest food webs, from soil organisms through understory plants to canopy dwelling species, is replaced by essentially two dimensional agricultural systems where a single plant species dominates the landscape. Agricultural food webs, while simplified compared to natural systems, still support surprising diversity. Crop fields create novel habitats that some species have learned to exploit. Red-winged blackbirds nest in cornfields. European starlings follow livestock to capture disturbed insects, and countless invertebrates have adapted to feed on both cultivated plants and the weeds that grow alongside them. These agricultural food webs represent new ecological experiments, shaped more by human management decisions than by natural environmental gradients. The massive scale of modern agriculture has created continent spanning monocultures that support highly mobile species capable of tracking resource availability across vast distances. Migratory birds that once followed natural phenological cycles now time their movements to coincide with crop harvests. Huge flocks of waterfowl descend on flooded rice fields, while seed eating birds concentrate in areas where grain crops are being harvested, creating temporary feeding bonanzas that can support millions of individuals. Pesticide use in agriculture demonstrates how human activities can create cascading effects through food webs that extend far beyond their intended targets. When insecticides eliminate invertebrate prey, insectivorous birds must travel farther to find food or switch to alternative prey species. The accumulation of persistent chemicals like DDT in food webs led to the near extinction of predatory birds like peregrine falcons and bald eagles, as these top predators concentrated toxins from all the contaminated prey they consumed throughout their lifetimes. Urban environments have created entirely novel food webs that exist nowhere in nature. Cities concentrate food resources in ways that can support much higher densities of certain species than natural habitats. Urban coyotes have learned to exploit garbage, pet food, and even pets themselves, allowing them to thrive in densities impossible in wild landscapes. Urban raptors like Cooper's hawks specialize in hunting the abundant songbirds attracted to backyard feeders, creating predator-prey relationships maintained entirely by human provisioning. The introduction of non-native species represents another profound way humans have altered global food webs. Sometimes these introductions create new feeding relationships that integrate relatively smoothly into existing webs. More often, they disrupt established relationships or create entirely novel interactions with unpredictable consequences. European starlings in North America compete with native cavity nesting birds for nest sites, while also consuming different invertebrate prey, altering both reproductive success and food availability for native species. Aquatic systems have been particularly vulnerable to human alterations. The construction of dams fundamentally changes riverine food webs by blocking the movement of nutrients, sediments, and organisms between upstream and downstream areas. Salmon runs that once carried marine nutrients far inland are interrupted, affecting not just the fish themselves, but entire riparian forest communities that depended on the nutrients from decomposing salmon carcasses. Marine food webs face disruption from multiple human activities simultaneously. Overfishing removes key predator species, allowing their prey to increase and potentially overgraze lower trophic levels. Bottom trawling destroys seafloor habitats that support complex benthic communities. Agricultural runoff creates dead zones where excess nutrients trigger algal blooms that consume available oxygen, suffocating entire food webs in affected areas. Pollution introduces entirely artificial elements into food webs that can fundamentally alter their structure and function. Heavy metals accumulate in sediments and bioconcentrate as they move up food chains, often reaching toxic levels in top predators. Microplastics now contaminate food webs from the deepest ocean trenches to the highest mountain lakes, with consequences we are only beginning to understand. Climate change, largely driven by human activities, is creating novel environmental conditions that force rapid reorganizations of food web relationships. As temperature and precipitation patterns shift, species must track suitable conditions geographically or adapt to new circumstances. Some food web relationships are proving more flexible than others, leading to mismatches in timing and distribution that can disrupt long established ecological partnerships. The warming of Arctic regions illustrates how climate change can trigger cascading effects through food webs. As sea ice diminishes, ice dependent species like polar bears and ringed seals face declining habitat availability. The loss of ice also affects the timing and extent of algal blooms beneath the ice, which form the foundation of Arctic marine food webs. These changes ripple up through the entire system, affecting everything from Arctic cod to seabirds to marine mammals. Human activities have also created novel forms of connectivity between previously isolated food webs. Global transportation networks allow species to move between continents in a matter of days, creating opportunities for invasive species to establish in new environments. Ballast water from ships has transferred countless marine organisms between ocean basins, while global trade in plants and animals has homogenized terrestrial communities across different continents. Some human modifications of natural systems have had positive effects on certain food webs. The creation of artificial wetlands for wastewater treatment has provided habitat for waterfowl and other wetland dependent species in regions where natural wetlands have been destroyed. Urban parks and green spaces can serve as refugia for native species and stepping stones for dispersal through otherwise inhospitable landscapes. The supplemental feeding of wildlife through bird feeders, wildlife refuges, and other programs has created dependencies that alter natural feeding patterns. While this provisioning can help species survive difficult periods, it also concentrates animals in ways that may increase disease transmission and alter natural population regulation mechanisms. Some species have become so dependent on human food sources that they have lost the ability to find natural foods effectively. Restoration efforts represent attempts to reconstruct food webs in degraded habitats, though these projects face significant challenges. Rebuilding complex ecological relationships requires not just reestablishing individual species, but recreating the environmental conditions and interaction networks that support natural feeding relationships. Success often depends on understanding the subtle requirements of key species and the cascading effects of their presence or absence. The concept of novel ecosystems has emerged to describe habitats so altered by human activities that they cannot be restored to any previous natural state. These systems require new approaches to management that acknowledge their hybrid nature while working to maintain as much ecological functionality as possible. Urban forests, agricultural landscapes with semi natural areas, and other human dominated systems represent the future of conservation in an increasingly crowded world. Understanding human impacts on food webs is crucial for predicting how ecosystems will respond to continued global changes. As human populations grow and climate change accelerates, the challenge becomes managing our impacts in ways that maintain the essential functions of natural food webs while meeting human needs for food, shelter, and economic development. The recognition that humans are now integral components of virtually all food webs represents a fundamental shift in how we think about our relationship with nature, moving from the illusion of separation toward an understanding of our deep ecological interconnectedness with all life on Earth. In the misty valleys of Yellowstone National Park, a wolf pack moves silently through stands of young aspen trees, their presence barely disturbing the morning quiet. These wolves represent one of conservation's most celebrated success stories, their reintroduction in 1995, helping to restore ecological relationships that had been missing for nearly 70 years. As the pack disappears into the forest, the trembling leaves of the aspens seem to whisper a reminder that sometimes, with careful planning and dedicated effort, we can begin to mend the broken chains in nature's web. The science of ecological restoration has evolved from simple species reintroduction to sophisticated understanding of how to rebuild entire networks of ecological relationships. Restoring a food web requires more than simply returning missing species to a landscape. It demands recreating the environmental conditions, habitat complexity, and interaction networks that allow natural feeding relationships to flourish once again. The Yellowstone wolf reintroduction illustrates the cascading effects that can occur when a key predator returns to an ecosystem. Within a few years of the wolves' return, deer behavior began to change. No longer able to linger in open areas without risk, deer spent less time feeding in valleys and along streams. This behavioral shift, known as the landscape of fear, allowed vegetation in these areas to recover. Aspen groves that had been heavily browsed for decades began to regenerate, their young shoots now able to grow beyond the reach of grazing animals. The recovery of riparian vegetation triggered additional cascading effects through the food web. Returning songbirds found nesting sites in the recovering willows and aspens. Beaver populations began to recover as their preferred food plants became available again. The dams built by these ecosystem engineers created wetland habitats that supported amphibians, waterfowl, and countless invertebrates. Stream channels, no longer destabilized by heavy browsing along their banks, began to meander naturally again, creating the habitat complexity that supports diverse aquatic communities. Marine protected areas represent another approach to food web restoration, removing human fishing pressure to allow natural predator prey relationships to reestablish. In many cases, these protected areas show rapid recovery of fish populations and the restoration of natural size structure within communities. Large predatory fish, absent from fished areas, return to their ecological roles as top predators, influencing the behavior and abundance of their prey species. The recovery of sea otter populations along the Pacific coast of North America demonstrates how restoring a single species can rebuild entire ecosystem functions. Sea otters were hunted to near extinction for their fur, eliminating the primary predator of sea urchins. Without predation pressure, urchin populations exploded, overgrazing kelp forests and creating barren underwater landscapes called urchin barrens. The protection and reintroduction of sea otters has allowed kelp forests to recover in many areas, restoring habitat for dozens of species that depend on these underwater forests. Coral reef restoration faces unique challenges because these ecosystems depend on the symbiotic relationship between corals and their algal partners. Rising ocean temperatures and acidification threaten this partnership, making it difficult to restore reefs even when other human impacts are reduced. Restoration efforts now include techniques like selective breeding of heat resistant corals and assisted migration of coral species to more suitable locations. Wetland restoration projects have achieved remarkable success in many regions, recreating habitat for waterfowl, fish, and countless other species. These efforts require careful attention to hydrology, soil conditions, and plant community establishment. Successful wetland restoration often involves removing drainage systems, controlling invasive species, and reestablishing native plant communities that can support the full range of species that depend on these habitats. Forest restoration faces the challenge of recreating complex, three-dimensional habitat structure that develops over decades or centuries in natural systems. Early restoration efforts often focused on tree planting, but ecologists have learned that successful forest restoration requires attention to understory plants, soil organisms, and the intricate relationships between species at different levels of the forest canopy. The restoration of fire adapted ecosystems requires bringing back natural disturbance regimes that many plant and animal communities depend on. Prescribed burning programs attempt to recreate the natural fire cycles that maintained grasslands and open woodlands before European settlement. These efforts face challenges from air quality concerns, liability issues, and the difficulty of managing fire in landscapes now fragmented by human development. Species reintroduction programs have achieved notable successes but also faced significant challenges. The California Condor Recovery Program has brought this magnificent bird back from the brink of extinction through captive breeding and careful management of reintroduced populations. However, condors still face threats from lead poisoning and habitat loss that require ongoing management attention. The reintroduction of large herbivores faces particular challenges in landscapes that have been modified by human activities. European efforts to restore grazing ecosystems through the reintroduction of wild horses, bison, and other large herbivores must contend with concerns about property damage, disease transmission, and public safety in densely populated landscapes. Urban restoration projects demonstrate that food web reconstruction can occur even in highly modified environments. The transformation of abandoned industrial sites into green spaces has created novel habitats that support surprising diversity. These urban ecosystems often combine native and non native species in ways that don't occur in natural systems, but they still provide essential ecosystem services and habitat for wildlife. River restoration projects focus on removing dams, restoring natural flow regimes, and reconnecting floodplains with their rivers. These efforts can dramatically improve habitat for fish and other aquatic species, while also restoring the natural processes that transport nutrients and sediments through watersheds. The removal of dams on the Elwha River in Washington state allowed salmon runs to reestablish in areas they hadn't accessed for over a century. Pollinator restoration has become increasingly important as bee populations decline worldwide. Efforts to restore native plant communities that provide nectar and pollen throughout the growing season, combined with reduced pesticide use and creation of nesting habitat, are helping to support both native bee populations and managed honeybees that are crucial for agricultural production. The restoration of apex predators often generates significant controversy because these species can come into conflict with human activities. Wolf reintroduction programs must address concerns about livestock predation and public safety. Efforts to restore large cats like jaguars or cougars face similar challenges in balancing ecological restoration goals with human safety and economic concerns. Climate change is creating new challenges for restoration efforts as the environmental conditions that supported historical ecosystems continue to change. Restoration ecologists are increasingly focusing on assisted migration, moving species to locations where they are more likely to survive under future climate conditions rather than trying to recreate past ecosystems. Restoration genetics is emerging as an important tool for food web reconstruction, using genetic techniques to ensure that reintroduced populations have sufficient genetic diversity to adapt to changing conditions. Captive breeding programs now routinely use genetic analysis to manage breeding decisions and maintain healthy populations for eventual release. Community involvement has become recognized as essential for successful restoration projects. Local communities that understand and support restoration goals are more likely to protect restored areas and contribute to ongoing management efforts. Indigenous knowledge often provides crucial information about historical ecosystem conditions and traditional management practices that supported biodiversity. The economic benefits of restoration projects are increasingly recognized, with restored ecosystems providing services like flood control, water purification, and carbon storage that have real economic value. This recognition has helped secure funding for restoration efforts and demonstrates that ecological restoration can provide both environmental and economic benefits. Monitoring and adaptive management are crucial components of successful restoration projects. Restored ecosystems often develop in unexpected ways, requiring ongoing adjustments to management strategies. Long term monitoring allows restoration practitioners to learn from both successes and failures, continually improving restoration techniques. As restoration science advances, the hope grows that we can not only halt the degradation of natural food webs, but actively repair the damage that has been done, creating a world where the intricate connections that sustain life can flourish once again. In a laboratory in Costa Rica, a researcher carefully extracts a sample of water from a bromeliad plant growing high in the forest canopy. This tiny pool, no larger than a teacup, will be analyzed using environmental DNA techniques that can identify every organism that has left genetic traces in the water. The results will reveal a hidden world of microscopic predators, decomposers, and parasites that participate in food webs too small and ephemeral for traditional ecological methods to detect. This represents just one example of how new scientific techniques are revolutionizing our understanding of the ancient patterns that govern feeding relationships in nature. Modern molecular techniques are unveiling feeding relationships that remained invisible to previous generations of ecologists. Stable isotope analysis allows researchers to trace the flow of elements through food webs with unprecedented precision, revealing dietary connections that would be impossible to observe directly. By analyzing the isotopic signatures of nitrogen and carbon in animal tissues, scientists can determine not just what an organism has been eating, but where in the food web it obtains its nutrition and how that nutrition moves through the ecosystem. These chemical detective techniques have revealed surprising feeding relationships that challenge traditional assumptions about food web structure. Deep sea creatures living near hydrothermal vents were found to derive much of their nutrition from chemosynthetic bacteria, even when they live far from the vents themselves. Arctic foxes on remote islands obtain significant nutrition from marine sources carried inland by seabirds that nest in coastal colonies. Even terrestrial predators in forests adjacent to streams receive substantial energy subsidies from aquatic insects that emerge as adults. Environmental DNA analysis is revealing the presence of cryptic species that play important but previously unrecognized roles in food webs. Water samples from lakes and streams contain genetic material from countless organisms, allowing researchers to identify species that are too small, too rare, or too secretive to detect through conventional sampling methods. This technique has revealed extensive communities of microscopic predators and parasites that form complex food webs within food webs, operating at scales that were previously invisible to science. The discovery of vast fungal networks connecting forest plants has fundamentally changed our understanding of how nutrients move through terrestrial food webs. These mycorrhizal networks, sometimes called the wood wide web, allow trees to share carbon, nitrogen, and other nutrients across species boundaries. Mother trees can support their offspring by transferring resources through these fungal connections, while also communicating chemical signals that warn of insect attacks or other threats. These underground networks create food web connections that operate on entirely different principles than traditional predator prey relationships. Fungi receive carbon from plants in exchange for mineral nutrients, but the relationship is far more complex than simple mutualism. Some plants can parasitize these networks, obtaining nutrition from other plants without contributing photosynthetic energy. Other plants manipulate the networks to their advantage, essentially cheating their neighbors out of shared resources. Climate change research is revealing how rapidly food web relationships can shift in response to environmental changes. Long term studies show that many food webs are already reorganizing as species respond to changing temperature and precipitation patterns. Some predator prey relationships are becoming mismatched in timing, with predators arriving at breeding areas before or after their prey species reach peak abundance. Other relationships are shifting geographically as species track suitable climate conditions at different rates. The study of urban food webs has revealed remarkable adaptability in species that can exploit human modified environments. Urban predators like Cooper's hawks and peregrine falcons have learned to hunt under artificial lights, extending their hunting periods and taking advantage of prey species that are disoriented by light pollution. Urban plants bloom earlier and longer than their rural counterparts, supporting extended activity periods for pollinators and herbivorous insects. Technological advances in tracking and monitoring are providing unprecedented insights into animal movement and feeding behavior. GPS collars on wolves reveal how pack hunting strategies vary with terrain, prey availability, and pack size. Satellite tags on marine animals show how they follow oceanic productivity patterns across ocean basins, timing their movements to coincide with seasonal blooms of plankton and the fish that feed on them. Acoustic monitoring is revealing nocturnal and secretive feeding behaviors that were previously impossible to study. Automated recording devices can distinguish the echolocation calls of different bat species, showing how multiple species partition acoustic space to reduce competition while foraging. Underwater microphones capture the sounds of marine predators feeding, revealing feeding behaviors and prey selection patterns that occur far from human observation. The microbiome revolution has shown that every organism carries within it entire communities of bacteria, fungi, and other microorganisms that play crucial roles in nutrition and digestion. The gut microbiomes of herbivores contain bacterial communities that can break down cellulose and other plant compounds that the host animal cannot digest on its own. These microbial communities can change rapidly in response to dietary shifts, allowing animals to adapt to new food sources within days or weeks. Research on coral reefs has revealed the crucial role of microbial communities in maintaining these ecosystems. The bacteria living within coral tissues not only help with photosynthesis, but also provide protection against pathogens and help corals acquire essential nutrients from seawater. When environmental stress disrupts these microbial communities, coral bleaching and death often follow, showing how food web stability depends on relationships at the microscopic scale. The discovery of priming effects in plant communities has shown how the death and decomposition of one plant species can influence the growth and survival of others through complex soil chemistry changes. These effects can persist for years, creating legacy effects that influence food web development long after the original organism has disappeared. Studies of animal personality and individuality are revealing that food webs are shaped not just by species interactions, but by individual behavioral differences within species. Bold individuals may exploit different food sources than shy individuals of the same species, effectively creating multiple ecological niches within a single species. These individual differences can influence population dynamics and community structure in ways that were previously unrecognized. The field of eco-evolutionary feedbacks is showing how ecological and evolutionary processes interact much more rapidly than previously thought. Predation pressure can drive evolutionary changes in prey species within just a few generations, which in turn affects predator populations and community structure. These rapid evolutionary changes mean that food webs are constantly evolving, not just ecologically, but genetically. Research on trophic cascades has revealed that these top-down effects are far more common and important than previously recognized. The loss or addition of predators can trigger cascading changes that affect species several levels down in the food web, sometimes leading to completely different ecosystem states. These discoveries have important implications for conservation and restoration efforts. Studies of food web resilience are identifying the characteristics that make some ecosystems more resistant to disturbance than others. Highly connected food webs with many alternative feeding pathways tend to be more stable than simple systems with few connections. However, highly connected systems can also transmit disturbances more rapidly, creating trade-offs between stability and vulnerability. The integration of big data approaches with ecological research is allowing scientists to analyze patterns at unprecedented scales. Global databases of species interactions are revealing general principles that govern food web structure across different ecosystems and continents. Machine learning algorithms can predict which species are likely to interact based on their traits and environmental conditions. These technological advances are also revealing the importance of temporal dynamics in food web stability. Food webs that appear stable when viewed as snapshots may actually be highly dynamic when observed over time, with species compositions and interaction strengths fluctuating in complex patterns that maintain overall system stability through constant change. As our understanding of food web complexity continues to grow, it becomes increasingly clear that these systems operate through mechanisms far more intricate and interconnected than early ecologists could have imagined, reminding us that nature's ancient patterns still hold many secrets waiting to be discovered. As dawn breaks over a restored prairie, The first meadowlarks of the day begin their liquid songs from perches on native grasses that sway gently in the morning breeze. The seeds these grasses will produce will feed countless insects and small mammals, which in turn will support the hawks and owls that hunt across these recovered grasslands. This scene represents both an ending and a beginning, the completion of our journey through the interconnected world of food webs and the start of a new chapter in our understanding of our place within these ancient networks of life. The story of food webs is ultimately the story of connection, of relationships that bind every living thing into patterns so intricate and enduring that they have persisted through countless environmental changes over billions of years. From the first photosynthetic bacteria that learned to harvest sunlight to the complex marine ecosystems that support blue whales, life has continuously woven itself into ever more elaborate networks of mutual dependence. These connections operate across scales that challenge human comprehension. The bacteria in a handful of soil participate in chemical exchanges that influence the growth of towering trees. The migration of a single whale species affects marine ecosystems across entire ocean basins. The flowering of plants on one continent provides nectar for pollinators, whose activities influence seed production that feeds birds migrating to distant shores. Perhaps most remarkably, these relationships continue to evolve and adapt even as we observe them. Food webs are not static museums of evolutionary history, but dynamic, living systems that respond to changing conditions with remarkable flexibility. Species develop new feeding relationships, populations shift their distributions to track changing resources, and entire communities reorganize themselves in response to environmental pressures. Climate change is creating unprecedented challenges for these ancient systems, forcing reorganizations that occur faster than many species can adapt. Yet, even as some traditional relationships break down, new ones emerge. Urban environments are creating novel ecosystems that support unexpected species combinations. Agricultural landscapes are developing their own distinctive food web patterns. Marine systems are reorganizing as ocean chemistry and temperature patterns shift. The resilience of natural systems offers both hope and sobering lessons. Many food webs have demonstrated remarkable ability to recover from disturbances, reorganizing themselves around new species combinations or restored environmental conditions. The recovery of marine protected areas shows how quickly natural relationships can rebuild when given the opportunity. Forest succession demonstrates nature's ability to reconstruct complex vertical food webs from bare ground. However, this resilience has limits. When key species are lost or when environmental changes exceed the adaptive capacity of organisms, food webs can collapse into simplified states that may persist for decades or centuries. The challenge for conservation and restoration efforts lies in understanding these limits and working within them to maintain ecosystem function. Human activities have made us unwitting participants in food webs worldwide. Our agricultural systems support billions of people, but have simplified natural food webs across vast areas. Our cities create novel habitats that some species exploit successfully while excluding others entirely. Our transportation networks have connected previously isolated ecosystems, sometimes with beneficial results, but often with devastating consequences for native species. Recognizing our role as participants in rather than observers of food webs represents a fundamental shift in how we think about conservation and environmental management. Instead of trying to preserve pristine natural systems separate from human influence, We must learn to manage human dominated landscapes in ways that maintain essential ecological functions while meeting human needs. The concept of ecosystem services has helped quantify the benefits that functioning food webs provide to human societies. Pollination services support agricultural production worth billions of dollars annually. Predator species control pest populations that would otherwise devastate crops. Decomposer communities recycle nutrients and organic matter, maintaining soil fertility. Marine food webs support fisheries that provide protein for billions of people. Understanding these services has led to new approaches to conservation that emphasize the economic value of maintaining natural food web relationships. Payment for ecosystem services programs compensate landowners for managing their property in ways that support biodiversity and ecosystem function. Carbon markets create financial incentives for forest conservation and restoration. Green infrastructure projects in cities recognize that natural systems can provide services like stormwater management more cost effectively than engineered solutions. The future of food webs will be shaped by how successfully we learn to balance human needs with the requirements of the countless other species that share our planet. This balance requires understanding not just individual species, but the complex web of relationships that support ecosystem function. It demands recognition that human well being ultimately depends on the health of the natural systems that provide the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the stable climate that makes human civilization possible. Technological advances continue to reveal new layers of complexity in food web relationships. Environmental DNA analysis shows us microscopic communities we never knew existed. Satellite tracking reveals migration patterns that span continents and connect ecosystems we never imagined were related. Genetic analysis shows us how rapidly evolution can reshape ecological relationships in response to changing conditions. These discoveries remind us that our understanding of food webs remains incomplete. Every new study reveals unexpected connections, novel feeding relationships, or surprising adaptations that challenge our assumptions about how nature works. The humble bromeliad pool that began this chapter may contain feeding relationships that have existed for millions of years but remain unknown to science. Education and public engagement will play crucial roles in determining how successfully human societies learn to live within the constraints and opportunities provided by natural food webs. Children who grow up understanding their connections to the natural world are more likely to make decisions as adults that support ecosystem health. Communities that recognize their dependence on natural systems are more likely to protect and restore the habitats that support them. The restoration successes we explored offer blueprints for healing damaged ecosystems and rebuilding broken food web connections. Each successful restoration project provides lessons about what works and what doesn't, building knowledge that can be applied to future challenges. The wolves returning to Yellowstone, the whales recovering in protected waters, and the prairies being restored from agricultural land all represent proof that dedicated effort can rebuild natural systems. Indigenous knowledge systems offer valuable perspectives on sustainable relationships with natural food webs. Traditional ecological knowledge, developed over thousands of years of careful observation and interaction with natural systems, provides insights into ecosystem function that complement modern scientific approaches. Incorporating indigenous perspectives into conservation and management efforts has improved outcomes for both human communities and natural ecosystems. As we look toward the future, the story of food webs becomes a story of choices We can choose to continue simplifying natural systems in pursuit of short term economic gains, or we can choose to maintain the complexity that supports long term ecosystem health. We can choose to view ourselves as separate from nature, or we can choose to embrace our role as participants in the ancient networks that connect all life. The meadowlark's song that opened this chapter carries within it the voices of all the organisms that support its existence, from the soil bacteria that nourish the grasses where it builds its nest, to the insects it captures to feed its young. In learning to listen to these songs, we begin to understand our place in the continuing story of life on Earth, a story written in the countless daily interactions between species that transform sunlight into the rich tapestry of existence that surrounds us.